Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere deep in Sicily, where the air feels heavy, even in stillness, and every footstep on a dirt path seems like it's trespassing on something sacred or secret. Picture a dusty village where the windows shutter early and the silence lingers too long after sunset. In Corleone, the fan hums gently above an aging kitchen table. Shadows stretch longer than they should, and somewhere in that quiet, a boy named Leoluca Bagarella is learning to keep his voice down. You probably won't survive this kind of silence. Not the metaphorical kind, but the one that's so thick it feels like you're choking on it. Because in this town, silence isn't awkward, it's survival. And Leoluca, the youngest of 8, drinks it in like milk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now in your part of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Bagarella house doesn't look different from any other in Corleone. Stone walls, a tiled roof, and that slightly bowed front gate that seems like it's never been properly fixed. But inside, discipline is king. His father, a laborer with rough hands and quiet fury, rules the household like a barracks. The older brothers are either at work or out of sight. His mother cooks in silence, stirring tomato sauce that simmers like an unsaid truth. It's the 1950s. Italy is rebuilding itself with bricks and bribes. In Corleone, rebuilding means keeping your head down while power realigns itself quietly. Leoluca spends his boyhood observing things most kids would never notice. How long his uncle stays at the cafe, which windows are shuttered too early, and why the priest sometimes limps after a visit to the butcher. And oh, the priest. Don Salvatore, they call him. An older man with cloudy eyes and a rosary that rattles louder than it should. Many people still think that priests in small villages simply bless babies and bury the dead. But Don Salvatore? He knows everyone's secrets. Some say Leoluca learned his first lesson in leverage just watching him. Corleone's kids are built differently. There's no playground gossip, just quiet gestures. A shoulder turned the wrong way could mean weeks of trouble. Leoluca isn't the tallest or the strongest, but he listens better than anyone else. And in a town like this, that's more dangerous than a switchblade. There's a boy he plays with occasionally, Salvatore Riina. Yes, that Riina. Toto, they call him, though no one says it with affection. He's a few years older and already has the kind of eyes that make dogs nervous. Their friendship isn't warm, exactly. It's practical. Toto needs someone who watches well. Leoluca needs someone who doesn't mind his silences. They fish together in the stream just outside of town. Not for fun. These are poor boys, and fish mean food. One day, Leoluca spots a dead man in the reeds. The body is bloated, the skin oddly pale. Toto doesn't scream. He just says, "We fish downstream now." And that's it. That's the day the river changes. By the time Leoluca turns 15, he's fluent in what's not said. He knows which doors you don't knock on and which men you never meet in daylight. One of his brothers, Calogero, is rumored to be involved. That word hangs in the air like smoke, never defined, always understood. Mainstream history will tell you that the Sicilian mafia around this time is reorganizing, merging rural clans into more structured units. But for boys like Leoluca, it just means more rules to memorize, more rituals to witness. One night, he follows Calogero into a vineyard after dark and sees a man kneel in the dirt, cut his palm, and swear something in Latin. Calogero sees Leoluca, but says nothing. Later that week, Leoluca receives a new pair of shoes and a nod that feels heavier than it should. He grows up in the margins. No school beyond what's necessary. No girlfriends. Those belong to safer boys. Instead, he works odd jobs, fixing fences, carrying crates, once even helping the village dentist, which he later jokes gave him a lifelong hatred of metal. The early 60s pass like this, quiet, efficient, and strangely clean, until the day his brother is gunned down outside a bakery. It's not personal, they say. It's business. But Leoluca watches his mother cry into a black scarf, and something calcifies behind his eyes. From that day, the softness is gone. He walks straighter. He smiles less. And when Salvatore Riina rises through the mafia ranks like smoke through a chimney, Leoluca follows, not like a friend, but like a shadow. By 1968, both men are deeper into the underworld than most of Palermo's politicians dare guess. And still, no one has much to say about Leoluca, because no one ever hears him coming. Some wonder, how did he stay so invisible? So cold? Was it the loss? The upbringing? Or maybe he just learned early on that the loudest men die first. What do you think? He's the priest's nephew, technically, though no one calls him that anymore. And he's also the butcher's boy, by habit, if not by blood. That's how people in Corleone start to define Leoluca Bagarella, by shadows of proximity. The church, the blade, the silence. All three frame him like an unfinished portrait. By the mid-1970s, Salvatore Riina is more than a rising star. He's the gravitational pull in Palermo's criminal underworld. And Leoluca, he's the mass that moves silently behind that pull. Not a second in command, not exactly. More like insulation. The one who absorbs shock, who steps into rooms first and out of back doors last. Their bond goes beyond hierarchy. Riina marries Ninetta Bagarella, Leoluca's sister, and the family lines twist like vines. This isn't a romantic union, no candlelight vows or heartfelt toasts. It's a merger. Mafia families have always known that blood can bind tighter than fear, and Toto knows what he's doing. With Ninetta, he gets legitimacy. With Leoluca, he gets loyalty incarnate. Family dinners are oddly quiet affairs. You might think a table full of mafiosi would roar with laughter and spilled wine. But no. The Bagarella-Riina household hums with low murmurs and exchanged glances. One misplaced fork clink is enough to pause conversation. Leoluca watches everything, even at the table. He notes who refills Riina's glass, who keeps their eyes low, who smiles too much, and when he does speak, it's short, sparse, a nod of agreement, a warning disguised as a question. Outside the house, things aren't much louder. Palermo is churning. Judges are declaring war on the mafia. The heroin trade is pouring lyre into the Cosa Nostra's pockets, and the violence is escalating like an opera. People are disappearing, not metaphorically, just gone. And when someone disappears, there's a pattern. First, their routine is studied. Then, their habits tested. Maybe a false tip here, a subtle shift in delivery routes there. Finally, when all variables are known, the silence falls. That's the part Leoluca handles. The silence. Many people still think that Bagarella never pulled the trigger himself, that he always worked one step removed, orchestrating rather than executing. But survivors, those rare few, tell stories of a man who could blend in until he didn't. One even said, "He didn't move like a killer. He moved like a curtain being drawn shut." He isn't flashy. No gold chains or expensive suits. His signature is simplicity. Dark trousers, clean shoes, pressed shirts with no pattern. The kind of look that never stands out but always seems familiar. You might have seen him in the bakery, or at the post office, or maybe not at all. That was the point. One night in 1978, a car bomb kills a mid-level political figure with suspected mafia ties. Nothing public, nothing official. But whispers blame the Bagarella Riina faction, and in a quiet apartment on Via Malaspina, Leoluca calmly finishes his espresso, while someone down the block vomits from nerves. You know that feeling when you enter a room and sense that something happened there. Something old and heavy, though no one will say what. That's how the streets of Palermo start to feel. Not loud with crime, but layered with residue. Leoluca develops a habit. Walking early, just before dawn, when the streets still belong to cats and fog. Sometimes with a dog, sometimes without. Always the same route. No one stops him. No one waves. At a bar near the port, an old man polishing glasses says, "He came here for 3 weeks. Never ordered the same thing twice, but always tipped the same. Exactly what the drink cost. Strange kind of symmetry." Riina, meanwhile, grows more volatile. The bosses above him are falling. Some are arrested, others ambushed. Bagarella keeps the machinery running. He arranges meetings, relays commands, filters news, and when Riina's anger spirals too hot, Leoluca cools the room by simply being there, like gravity, like consequence. There's a story, a strange one, that Leoluca once spent 3 days inside a burned-out cinema, watching the same reel of a war documentary on repeat. No one knows why. Some say he was scouting a meeting spot. Others say he just liked the silence of it, the darkness, the flicker, the way soldiers die without crying. Historical records from this time will show a steady increase in assassinations across Sicily. Journalists vanish, informants are found in rivers, and through it all, Leoluca remains a rumor. His name doesn't appear in case files. Not yet. But his presence? It's a ghost story cops tell each other. He gets married during this period too, but no wedding photos survive. Ninetta attends, visibly pregnant with Riina's child. The reception is brief, almost clerical. No dancing, just men standing in corners, checking watches that aren't ticking. There's a priest at the ceremony, of course. Maybe even the same Don Salvatore from his Boyhood. The man's older now, more bent. But when he blesses the couple, his voice cracks. And afterward, no one says why. You might ask, why would a man like Leoluca marry at all? What purpose could it serve? Security, perhaps. A veil. Or maybe, like all soldiers, he hoped for something to protect. But the truth? The truth sits in the silence between those who knew him. In the glances passed over fresh espresso. In the curt conversations behind shuttered storefronts. In the way Palermo, during these years, forgets how to breathe normally. And still, he remains out of focus, sharp only when necessary, invisible by choice. Remember that river from Section 1? The one that changed course after the body? Leoluca never fished there again. But years later, when a rival clan leader is found floating face down in another part of Sicily, someone says, "It smells like the Bagarella touch." What does that mean? No one explains, but everyone nods. He learns to disappear in daylight. Not metaphorically, not like a magician pulling scarves from sleeves, but truly disappear. Into traffic, into storefronts, into conversations where his name is never mentioned, though his meaning hovers like a scent. By the early 1980s, Leoluca Bagarella isn't climbing through the mafia ranks. He's folding into them, like mortar into brick. Riina is already consolidating power through the Corleone faction, spreading fear like it's a seasonal crop. But Leoluca? He moves underneath that rise, gliding through Palermo with the ease of someone who doesn't need to announce himself. There's no formal title, no ceremony that declares, "This man is Riina's right hand." But everyone knows. Because when things get serious, when a judge needs to vanish, or a meeting needs to happen without sound, Bagarella is the one who gets tapped. And what's most unsettling? He never looks rushed. There's no chaos around him. When others panic, Leoluca simply blinks, maybe adjusts his jacket. That's it. One mainstream historical fact that threads through this period. By 1981, the Second Mafia War begins. Hundreds die. Many are from rival clans, the Inzerillos, the Bontades, old families with roots so deep even priests hesitate before giving last rites. The violence is so frequent that newspapers start running daily tally boxes like sports scores. Who's dead? Who's missing? Who's next? And yet, Leoluca's name? Rarely printed. Not officially, but his presence, his pattern, is unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. He studies routes like a cartographer, knows when a man will stop for cigarettes, when he'll check his rearview mirror, when his wife leaves the salon on Tuesdays. He doesn't bark orders. He makes suggestions with a look. It's around this time that he develops a specific method for appearing at the end of hallways. People say he never walks down them, he just materializes. You're mid-sentence, and then you realize he's standing behind the last door, not moving, just listening. And no one remembers hearing him arrive. A local story from 1982. A small cafe near Ballarò Market gets a new owner. Friendly guy, ex-mechanic, loves soccer. One night, the cafe burns down in what looks like an accident. But days later, another cafe opens around the corner. Same chairs, same espresso, same mechanic. Only now he nods differently when certain men walk in. It's said that Leoluca visited both cafes, never ordered anything, just sat down, looked around, and left. That was enough. There's a growing sense that his influence isn't built on volume or violence, but timing. He doesn't break down doors. He waits until they're slightly ajar. Then he steps in. Like fog, many people still think that Bagarella was a necessary evil for Riina, that his coldness balanced out Riina's explosiveness. But some argue the opposite, that Riina's ruthlessness was sharpened because of Leoluca's calm. A terrifying yin and yang, one breathing fire, the other ice. The two men don't spend casual time together. They're not sipping wine by the sea or playing cards under lantern light. Their meetings are quiet, strategic, more chess than camaraderie, and always with one rule: never in the same place twice. Leoluca adopts a peculiar form of discipline. He wakes at the same time each morning, even while in hiding, reads the paper front to back, makes coffee the same way. 2 sugars, no milk, water just off the boil. He folds his shirt before bed, even when sleeping in safe houses that smell like mildew and mothballs. A cousin once told a reporter, off the record of course, that Leoluca used to brush his teeth twice before meetings. It was like he didn't want to leave a trace, not even his breath. There's a photo taken in 1983, blurry and half obscured, showing a group of men exiting a funeral. Most faces are identifiable: capos, lieutenants, drivers. But in the corner, just beneath a shadowed arch, there's a man with his collar up, head bowed. Many believe it's Bagarella. No confirmation, no denial. But those who knew him say it has his posture, Another story. This one from a cleaning woman in a downtown apartment building. He lived on the 6th floor for 3 months, never said a word, left envelopes for the milkman, never asked for anything. But every time I came to clean, the place smelled like old roses and ink. That smell, roses and ink, becomes a legend in itself. Years later, when a police sting raids a suspected hideout, they find a notebook filled with what appear to be poems. Haikus, of all things. Short, cold verses about oceans, smoke, and loss. Some pages have dates, some don't. None are signed. Scholars still debate. Were they truly written by Leoluca? Or left as a decoy, a mockery? So what do you think? Could a man like Bagarella, rigid, surgical, silent, also bleed his thoughts in 575? The thing is, for all his calculation, Leoluca is not unfeeling. There's a moment during the war when a hit is called on a young associate, barely 17. The boy made a mistake, said the wrong name in the wrong place. The punishment is clear. But Bagarella intervenes, quietly. The boy disappears, but is found months later working at a vineyard in Trapani under a different name. Why? No one knows. But when the vineyard owner was asked years later if he recognized the boy's visitor, he simply said, "His shoes were too clean for farm work." Details matter to Leoluca, not for vanity, but for precision. Clean shoes mean clear intent. A folded newspaper means a sharp mind. Silence means authority. And Palermo, in 1983, is full of noise. But not where Leoluca walks. By the time 1984 rolls around, Palermo isn't just afraid, it's exhausted. The air feels like it's carrying weight, like every breath drags something heavy into your chest. People glance over their shoulders, not for paranoia's sake, but because they've learned that footsteps aren't always just footsteps. And in this atmosphere, Leoluca Bagarella is no longer a rumor. He's not a shadow anymore. He's a consequence. The second Mafia war is reaching its crescendo. Car bombs don't surprise people anymore. They just confirm suspicions. The police don't chase suspects. They collect names. And those names, they all somehow brush against Corleone. When Sicily stops breathing, it's because Leoluca decides to hold its lungs shut. At Riina's side, he has taken on a new role. That of the final filter. Plans reach Riina's desk, but Leoluca is the one who greenlights what becomes action. He never speaks in rooms filled with men. Just glances, nods, occasionally a question that seems unrelated. Where did he go to school? How long has he had that car? But somehow, the answers are all he needs. There's a moment in 1984 that becomes legend. A journalist, young, eager, foolhardy, publishes an op-ed with the headline, "Corleone's Quiet Executioner." The article dares to mention Bagarella's name, dares to print it. 2 weeks later, the journalist retracts the piece, quits his job, and moves to Milan. No threats are traced, no formal complaints filed, but people notice that he leaves behind his car, his books, even his dog. Many people still think that Bagarella didn't even read the article, that someone else simply took care of it. But then again, Leoluca doesn't leave fingerprints. He leaves reactions. His efficiency begins to ripple through the organization. Young soldiers emulate his mannerisms, short answers, neutral expressions, pressed collars. It becomes a kind of reverent mimicry. But none quite master the art of appearing weightless in rooms filled with violence. You see, most men in Cosa Nostra seek reputation. They want to be feared, mentioned in news clippings, remembered in whispers. Bagarella isn't like that. He doesn't want to be remembered. He wants results and silence. During this time, he's put in charge of managing several houses, properties scattered across the region, safe for meetings, stash points, disappearances. One such house, a villa in Altofonte, becomes a ghost story in itself. Locals report seeing the lights flicker at odd hours. Men enter and never exit. Laundry hung with no one living inside. And one morning, a farmer tending nearby fields hears classical music drifting from the villa's upper window. Bach, they say. The next day, the house is empty. Not a chair left behind. Historical documents show that this period is when the mafia's heroin empire truly blooms. Millions in profits move through Swiss banks, New York pizza parlors, and back to Palermo. But these aren't backroom deals. They're handled with precision, and Leoluca oversees the relay like a conductor. An FBI memo from the time mentions him only once. We believe a figure known as the dentist coordinates shipments from Naples. No photo, no voice, only results. The dentist. Not for torture, though some assume that, but because he works with the precision of one. Small tools, no mess, one problem at a time, and still, he smiles only twice that anyone can recall. The first is at his niece's christening. He holds the baby like it's made of eggshells, nods at Riina across the table, and someone says they saw his lips curve. Barely, like a draft against the curtains. The second is when a police raid on one of their stash houses turns up completely empty. Not just of drugs, but of furniture, wires, fingerprints. Clean, almost staged. When Riina reports the news, Leoluca chuckles. Once. Soft and short. There's a theory, shared mostly by retired detectives over too much wine, that Bagarella used to travel under different names, often posing as a surveyor or language teacher. One even claimed he taught a 2-week Italian course in Nice under the name Professor Caligari. No one knows if it's true, but if it is, one wonders what he said on the first day of class. Another local tale. In 1985, a woman running a boarding house in Caltanissetta receives a guest who pays in full, never speaks, reads philosophy books, and leaves behind a copy of The Prince with a pressed violet between the pages. She says she found the scent of roses and ink. Was it Leoluca? Maybe. Or maybe the legend of him grows legs of its own. But there's one moment we do know is real. A wiretap, one of the first to ever record Riina and his close circle, catches a voice saying, "He'll handle it. Let Leoluca go see." The tone shifts after that. Quiet, almost reverent, like invoking a name that might echo too far, and echo it does. Because people begin disappearing in patterns again. Judges, informants, errant lieutenants. The kind of disappearances that don't make headlines until the bodies turn up weeks later in wells, quarries, ditches that look like ancient wounds. You might ask, how did he sleep at night? Was there guilt, doubt, fear? But that's the wrong question. The better one is, what did silence feel like to him? Maybe it wasn't absence. Maybe it was mastery. It's a wedding built on whispers, not vows. The small church in Palermo is decorated with soft lilies and silver ribbons, but there's no celebration in the air. No laughter spills out from the pews. Even the bells sound reserved, like they've been told to keep it down. Leoluca Bagarella is marrying. That fact alone raises eyebrows, not because it's scandalous, but because it feels unnecessary. Why would a man who treats intimacy like contraband willingly tie himself to anyone? But tie he does. The bride is quiet, pretty, in a subtle way, from a good family, not part of the Cosa Nostra, but close enough that no one asks questions. The ceremony lasts 23 minutes. The reception, held in the courtyard of an old villa outside Montreal, is even shorter. There's no band, no dancing, just long tables with neat platters of grilled eggplant and wine that no one seems eager to sip. Most guests arrive late and leave early. Riina is there, of course, standing like a general in a pressed gray suit. Ninetta, too, heavily pregnant, fanning herself with a folded napkin. She keeps glancing at her brother. Leoluca never looks back, and if you were a guest that day, if you were brave enough to be on the list, you might have noticed something odd. The silence. Not just the kind where no one's talking, but the kind that feels staged. Even the birds seem quieter, like they know something human and dark is happening. A mainstream historical fact worth noting: this wedding occurs just months after the infamous murder of General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, the anti-mafia prefect of Palermo. The city is still reeling. The government has declared a zero-tolerance crackdown, which mostly amounts to new posters and empty gestures. But the mafia is watching and adapting. Leoluca's marriage is part of that strategy. Camouflage wrapped in tradition, he moves his new wife into a modest home in Bagarella. She never appears in public. Neighbors hear music sometimes, soft Neapolitan ballads drifting through shuttered windows. But no one sees her face. She's not a prisoner, not exactly. She's simply married to a man who belongs more to shadows than daylight. Many people still think that Bagarella's wife was in love with him. Others claim she was terrified. But maybe, like many in Sicily, she simply understood the rules and followed them. Love and fear often wear the same suit here. In the weeks after the wedding, Leoluca becomes even harder to trace. He stops using phones altogether. No written notes, no visible entourage. Meetings happen at dusk, in half-lit garages or between rows of olive trees. Sometimes he doesn't speak at all, just listens, then leaves. There's a driver, young, loyal, too eager, who later tells investigators that riding with Leoluca felt like being in a slow car crash. You could feel danger pressing against the windshield, he says. And he never blinked, not once. I swear. One night, after a meeting in Villabate, the driver accidentally takes the wrong turn. They end up on a narrow path surrounded by thorny brush. Leoluca doesn't scold him, doesn't even sigh. He just says, "Reverse slowly. There's a dog." And yes, there is a dog, sitting in the middle of the road like it's been waiting. The driver never asks what that means. There's an undercurrent of superstition in how people speak about Bagarella. Some say he never casts a shadow under certain streetlights. Others swear his watch never ticks, but still tells perfect time. Of course, none of this is provable. But then again, his whole existence feels carved from folklore, and yet, he isn't mystical. He pays taxes, though under a different name. He owns properties, mostly through shell companies. He walks like someone who once ran but learned patience. Around this time, a low-level magistrate opens a case file that includes Leoluca's name. 2 weeks later, the magistrate recuses himself, officially due to family concerns. Unofficially, no one knows, but one document survives. A memo noting that Bagarella was spotted near Piazza Marina, speaking briefly to a man in a red coat. That man would be found 6 months later in a river near Trapani, his body weighed down with stones, his coat gone. The red coat becomes a kind of shorthand among investigators, a symbol of dead ends. What's curious is how Leoluca reacts to this growing attention. Not with evasion, but with stillness. He doesn't run. He simply becomes harder to describe. In one rare instance, an informant from Catania tells police he once shared a meal with Leoluca. "We had pasta alla norma," he says. "He ate slowly, asked about my mother's health, then told me to leave Palermo by morning." The man did. He moved to Belgium, never came back. So what kind of man gets married, builds a home, creates the illusion of stability, all while managing a network of assassins and smugglers? That's the paradox of Bagarella. He understands theater, not the kind with curtains and applause, but the everyday performances that keep people safe or scared. A wedding? It's not love. It's a signal, a message to rivals that he's still here, still growing, still too disciplined to fall into chaos. And the message lands. Other clans quiet down. Rival factions reconsider alliances. Even the police shift their focus, temporarily, toward flashier targets. Men who flaunt cars and girlfriends and champagne. Not men who slip through cities like breath through cracked windows. So what do you think? Is this restraint noble, or just another kind of cruelty? Because one thing's certain, in a world of loud men who die loudly, Leoluca Bagarella whispers, and the city listens. Palermo nights go dark, not all at once, but in pieces. Street lamps start to flicker in certain neighborhoods. Cafe windows close a little earlier. The sound of scooters zipping through alleyways thins out by twilight. The city learns quietly that visibility is an invitation, and in this new darkness, Leoluca Bagarella moves comfortably. It's the mid-1980s now. Riina's grip on the mafia is tightening like a vice, and the Corleonese faction is no longer just a threat. It's the architecture of power itself. Old families crumble. Long-standing bosses fall into exile or earth. Palermo's skyline doesn't change, but its rhythm does. Fear begins to sound normal. Leoluca becomes a fixed presence in this rhythm. Not a figurehead, not a loud boss barking orders over wine. He's something worse, a constant. The last face some men see. The first name whispered when something goes missing. There's a method to his presence. He never lingers too long anywhere. Never wears flashy watches. No cigars, no mistresses, no limousines. He's invisible until he wants to be seen. And when he does show up, it's not for conversation. It's for resolution. In this chapter of Sicilian history, something truly shifts. The murders aren't just tactical, they're philosophical. They aren't removing obstacles, they're making points. One mainstream historical fact. In 1985, the mafia kills Pio La Torre, a left-wing politician pushing for legislation to seize mafia assets. His death is a message, and Leoluca, though never officially tied to the act, is heavily suspected of involvement in coordinating it, not because he's seen, but because the style fits. Fast, brutal, precise, no mistakes. The number of assassinations in this period is staggering. Some are public, car bombs, daylight shootings. Others vanish into the night. But what's notable is that Bagarella's name surfaces again and again without ever sticking. He becomes a ghost woven into dossiers, always mentioned, never confirmed. There's a judge, Antonino Caponetto, who once said, "The most dangerous men are the ones who know when not to speak." And then quietly, he added, "Like Bagarella." And yet, there's always a strange grace in Leoluca's operations. No unnecessary casualties, no collateral. If someone disappears, it's because they were supposed to. No children harmed, no spouses touched. He runs terror like a surgeon runs an OR, but many people still think that this restraint was strategic, not moral. That he avoided mess not because he valued life, but because chaos made too much noise. And Leoluca valued silence. During this time, a pattern emerges. Small groups of men meet late at night, always in motion. Moving cars, changing rooms. Sometimes they use cafes that are closed for renovation. One such meeting happens in a warehouse that stores citrus crates. The smell of lemons masks the gun oil. An informant who survived long enough to tell the tale described Bagarella as a man who doesn't tap his fingers, doesn't adjust his sleeves, doesn't blink. He just sits, like he's already imagined all possible outcomes and picked the one that hurts the least. The executions ramp up in subtlety. One man drowns in his own swimming pool. Another collapses in a church pew. A third disappears entirely, his house left immaculate, a plate of half-eaten pasta still warm on the table. It's artistry and horror, precision so clean it looks accidental. Bagarella's base of operations is believed to be mobile. Some say he rotates through 3 apartments, one above a tailor, one near a convent, and one inside a building marked for demolition. All are connected by payphones and runners who know not to knock. There's an intercepted letter during this time. Handwritten, no name, addressed simply to L. It reads, "The stars have grown too loud. We must choose quieter constellations." The letter is unsigned. It is found during a raid on a suspected informant's home. No one ever confirms if it was written by Leoluca, but the tone? Icy, poetic, familiar. Scholars debate whether Bagarella's calm was discipline or pathology. So what do you think? Can someone become so dedicated to silence that they vanish into it? In the midst of all this, his wife remains unseen. Neighbors occasionally spot a woman in the window, watering plants. Sometimes, classical music spills out. Debussy, Satie, soft things that have no business playing in a house run by a man like that. But maybe that's the point. There's one tale, a curious one. A young delivery boy brings groceries to the Bagarella house. He forgets the change. The next morning, the exact amount appears in an envelope outside his door, with a note that says only, "Be thorough." The boy moves away a year later, but he keeps that envelope, framed it even. As Palermo's nights deepen into paranoia, a question starts forming inside law enforcement circles. Who is actually in charge? Because Riina may be the boss, but Bagarella is the design, the blueprint. The man who ensures Riina's madness doesn't topple the empire. He begins coordinating logistics for international routes. Not flashy shipments, quiet ones, medical containers, sealed paintings, shipments of shoes with hollow heels. He doesn't touch the goods. He just maps the routes, using codes based on chess notation. The first time police intercept one of these messages, they think it's nonsense. A list of moves, E4, C5, and F3. It's months before they realize they correspond to city movements. Each game, a plan. Each end game, a result. And Palermo? Palermo plays black, always defensive, always reactive, always dangerous. The man who wouldn't blink becomes legend quietly. By 1986, even hardened men within Cosa Nostra avoid looking Leoluca Bagarella in the eye for too long. Not because they've seen him do terrible things, most haven't, but because they've heard about what happens after a glance, a nod, a quiet tilt of the head. There's no shouting in his presence, No table pounding, no performative threats. He rules with a stillness that makes others fidget, just to remind themselves they're still alive. And by now, that stillness has a reputation. There's an infamous meeting, never confirmed, only whispered about, between Bagarella and an emissary from one of the old Palermo families. The emissary arrives wearing a pinstripe suit, smelling like citrus and aftershave. He talks for 20 minutes about territory, tradition, grievances. Leoluca doesn't speak once. When the man finishes, there's a pause. Bagarella stands, walks to the window, looks out at the empty street, then turns and says, "Don't send anyone else." That emissary leaves Sicily 3 days later, moves to Tunisia, changes his name, opens a fruit import business. He never returns. The Maxi trial is underway. It's a historical fact. Italy's largest anti-mafia prosecution, launched by judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, puts over 300 members of the mafia on trial. It's bold, monumental, and it enrages the Corleonese leadership. Riina becomes obsessed with striking back. He talks about decapitation, not metaphorically. Bagarella, on the other hand, doesn't express opinion. He just starts working longer hours, meeting with fewer people, sleeping in new places every week. He becomes thinner, not sickly, streamlined, focused. Friends notice the change. They don't ask about it. One night, an associate sees him fold a handkerchief into a perfect triangle and place it in his coat like a soldier preparing for inspection. He was too precise, the man says years later. It wasn't vanity. It was control. Control is what Bagarella deals in, not just over operations, but over outcomes. He studies reports like blueprints, analyzes police movements. He knows which judges are being rotated, which prosecutors have daughters in boarding school, which guards talk too much at cafes. And yet, he still walks alone. There's a story, only partially confirmed, that one night he walks from one end of Palermo to the other. No car, no escort, just a dark coat and a limp that appears only on cobblestones. A street camera captures someone who looks like him at 2:17 a.m. near Teatro Massimo. By 2:31, that figure vanishes. The footage after is empty street. Many people still think this walk was a test, a dare, a message, but no one knows for sure. Maybe it was just a man needing to breathe. What we do know is this. Bagarella starts appearing at meetings unannounced. He shows up 5 minutes early or 10 minutes late, but always as if he'd been there the whole time. His presence changes conversations. Men stop arguing. Phones get turned off. Glasses remain half full. He has that effect, the quiet reordering of atmosphere. Around this time, informants start to pop up. Low-level soldiers, drivers, even a few family members flip for lighter sentences. Riina reacts violently, but Bagarella, he starts to vanish again. It becomes clear he is planning something, moving beneath the headlines. Not a hit, not yet, but a mood is shifting. There's a pattern in the deaths that follow. They're quieter, cleaner, less public, as if someone's editing a manuscript, line by line, without disturbing the page. He stops sleeping in his marital home altogether. Whether this is for his wife's safety or his own, no one knows. She doesn't complain. She rarely leaves the house. But neighbors notice a change. No more music, no more flowers in the windows. She becomes a still life in her own right, trapped behind lace curtains and rumors. One day, a priest visits her, a family friend. He leaves visibly shaken, refuses to say why. Another detail. Leoluca begins journaling. Notebooks are later discovered with single sentences written per page. Things like, "History forgets too cleanly," and "Noise is just permission for someone to find you." Written in fountain pen, always on unlined paper. Scholars today debate whether this is evidence of introspection or something more mechanical, a habit, a vent. So what do you think? Was Bagarella reflecting or just cataloging? During this same period, a senior official from Rome visits Palermo for a security inspection. He stays in a luxury hotel overlooking the sea. One night, a single flower appears on his pillow. No note, no explanation. The next day, he shortens his trip. The security report goes unfinished. Coincidence, maybe? Or maybe it's Bagarella's way of reminding people that the war isn't only fought with guns. It's fought with tension, with symbolism, with silence so loud it leaves marks. There's a funeral, late summer, sticky air, wilted roses, where Bagarella is spotted at a distance. A priest's cousin had passed, no mafia connection. And yet, he attends, stands at the back, doesn't approach the casket, just lingers like a question. Afterward, someone asks him why he was there. He shrugs. Someone needed to. That's the thing about men like Leoluca Bagarella. You can't catch them in lies because they rarely speak. You can't outmaneuver them because they're not playing the same game. You can only hope they don't look in your direction. Pizza parlors and pistol smoke. That's what the headlines in New York would later reduce it to. Simple metaphors, bite-sized and easy to digest. But behind that lazy shorthand was a complex web of quiet men, gloved hands, and money folded into flour sacks. Leoluca Bagarella never sets foot in Manhattan, as far as anyone can prove. No photos, no passport stamps, no statements. And yet, his fingerprints, figuratively, are all over the expanding heroin network that stretches from Palermo to New Jersey and back. The American connection isn't new. Cosa Nostra had been working both sides of the Atlantic for decades. But what made the mid to late 80s so unique was how seamlessly the Corleone faction began running overseas logistics without ever raising their voice. And if Riina was the storm, Leoluca was the current. Steady, deep, and harder to detect. In 1987, DEA agents in Newark bust a small chain of pizzerias suspected of laundering drug money. They expect flashy mobsters, shouting in Italian, maybe a few gold chains. What they find instead are well-dressed men with clean records and impeccable manners. And in the safe, not guns, but ledgers. Precise, handwritten, and oddly poetic in style. One entry reads, "Thursday, 5 stars delivered. Moon half full. Naples responds with silence. The agents laugh. Assume it's code. They're not wrong." Each line corresponds to product weight, route status, and contact behavior. Bagarella's name doesn't appear, but the formatting, that matches the seized notebooks from Palermo months earlier. Many people still think that Bagarella never touched heroin deals directly, that he considered drug trafficking beneath the honor code of the older mafia days. But others suggest he was simply too smart to leave a trace. So, what do you think? Was he above it, or just better at hiding it? He sends men abroad, not just soldiers, but thinkers, accountants, linguists. They enroll in community colleges, work part-time at Italian delis, attend mass. They don't carry guns. They carry silence. One such man, captured later in a sting operation in Zurich, tells police, "I never met Bagarella, but every Thursday I received a poem." And yes, the poems matched his handwriting. What's remarkable is how unremarkable these front operations were. a dry cleaner in Toronto, a gelato stand in Marseille, a used bookstore in Astoria, Queens, all connected through vague ownership and even vaguer accounting. All eerily quiet. Bagarella's genius isn't expansion, it's containment. While other factions grow wild and sloppy, he trims his network like bonsai. Small roots, deep focus. He avoids the mistakes others make. No phone calls, no celebrations, no bribes that can be traced. Everything is built on suggestion. You receive a new espresso machine in your shop? That's the signal to change routes. A bottle of wine with a black ribbon. Time to disappear. It's around this time that his personal style changes slightly. Still austere, still precise, but now with an edge of elegance. A scarf, a watch with no numbers, a jacket that looks too plain to be expensive, but is. Those who see him call it a transformation, from soldier to architect. In one intercepted letter, never sent, but later found, he writes, "Control is not in what you hold, it's in what you let go of without fear." That letter was folded into a first edition of The Stranger by Camus, hidden beneath floorboards in a safe house near Naples. By 1988, American and European law enforcement begin compiling a list of ghost controllers, men who run operations with no documentation, no direct involvement, and no confirmed images. Bagarella consistently sits at the top of these lists, but inside Sicily, he remains grounded. He still walks Palermo's quieter streets at dusk, still visits the same barbershop on Via Roma. The barber, interviewed years later, says, "He never asked for anything fancy, but when I finished, he always adjusted the collar himself. Never let me touch it. There's something revealing in that gesture. A man who lets no one correct his appearance. A man who finishes what others start." He begins favoring certain chess players in international tournaments. Karpov, specifically, methodical, emotionless, deliberate. Associates say Bagarella would watch matches on grainy hotel televisions, taking notes. Not on the moves, but on the intervals, the pacing. He liked how long Karpov took to move his bishop. Said it reminded him of negotiations. One night, during a particularly tense period of interclan relations, Leoluca allegedly resolves a dispute by setting a small chessboard on a cafe table. No words, just the opening move, pawn to e4. The other man resigns after 6 moves. Whether this story is true or not almost doesn't matter. What matters is that people believe it, because belief is power. And in the mafia, belief can be more binding than evidence. There's another detail, small but haunting. A bakery in Geneva reports receiving monthly orders of Sicilian cannoli addressed to Mr. Luciano, always paid in full, no return address. The handwriting matches one of Bagarella's known aliases. The bakery owner kept the notes, framed them. He said, "You don't throw away something that's been this careful. Care." That's what defines Bagarella in this era. Not charisma, not cruelty, just immense, chilling care. Every step measured, every message layered. So, the pizza parlors? Yes, they laundered money. But the real story, the one too complex for headlines, was that somewhere, far from the ovens and cash registers, a man with quiet hands and ink-stained fingers was pulling the strings, and he never needed to leave Sicily to do it. The Maxi trial whispers louder than any car bomb. It begins in 1986, and by 1987, it's the largest criminal trial in world history. More than 400 defendants, nearly 500,000 pages of testimony. A fortified courtroom in Palermo built like a bunker, with bulletproof glass and armed guards lining every corridor. Judges Falcone and Borsellino sit at the helm like captains of a ship headed straight into storm water. And somewhere in the shadows, Leoluca Bagarella watches, not from a bench, not from the docks, but from safe houses, surveillance notes, grainy Polaroids spread across an iron table under dim light. He doesn't comment on the trial, doesn't say if it's a threat or a joke, but his schedule shifts. His routine tightens. His eyes are sharper now. Bagarella isn't on trial, not yet, but his name surfaces often in testimony. Informants, pentiti, begin to speak. Tommaso Buscetta among them. Buscetta is the big one, the insider turned state witness, and his revelations crack open Cosa Nostra's inner workings like a rotting walnut. He names Riina, he names Provenzano, and in between he whispers Leoluca. But here's the thing, even with all the ink and evidence, Bagarella remains untouchable. His name echoes, but never lands. Like smoke in a room with too many mirrors, many people still think that this was Bagarella's masterpiece. Not a murder, not a shipment, not a trial avoided, but an absence. The way he made the world believe he was everywhere and nowhere all at once. So what do you think? Was his invisibility brilliance or paranoia perfected? The prosecutors are frustrated. The public? Tense. Palermo begins to feel like a city holding its breath. Supermarkets hire private guards. Schools teach students what to do if a car explodes nearby. And Bagarella? He keeps attending Mass. The same church, the same pew, the same silent exit. A journalist once noted that when Bagarella walked out of church, the pigeons on the steps didn't move. That's the kind of calm he carried. Even birds didn't flinch. At night, he begins writing more frequently. His notebooks swell with strange, clipped thoughts. The wind is not loyal, the stone is. Names are too loud, better to be an echo. The trial is a chess game, but we flipped the board years ago. Some of these lines surface years later, scribbled on the backs of receipts, the margins of coded letters, even on the inside flaps of worn books. Each time, the same careful hand, the same signature ink, dark, heavy, unforgiving. Meanwhile, Riina is getting impatient. The pressure is mounting. Judges are pressing hard. Trials are dragging on. And somewhere in Riina's mind, a line crosses from defense to offense. That's when things begin to twist. One night, during a low-lit meeting at a farmhouse on the outskirts of Bagheria, Riina lays out a plan. He wants revenge. Not later. Now. He speaks of explosions, messages, executions with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Bagarella says nothing, but his jaw tightens. He doesn't like chaos. He prefers silence, strategy, precision, but loyalty, that still matters. And so, when the list of names is passed around, judges, prosecutors, policemen, he doesn't object. He just underlines 3 names: Falcone, Borsellino, Contorno. The plan begins. Slowly, methodically. Observations are gathered, habits logged, security protocols mapped like mazes, and Leoluca, true to form, doesn't handle explosives. He handles people, gets the right eyes in the right places, makes the phone calls that no one remembers hearing. There's a line in one of his notes from this time. Even the lion must learn to wait before the leap. The lion, of course, being Riina. The waiting, all Bagarella. A peculiar pattern emerges. A number of car repair shops across Palermo begin purchasing unusual items. Circuit boards, wire spools, pressure sensors. Not illegal, just odd. These shops all trace back to names linked to the Corleonesi, and yet no one talks. Police try to track Bagarella's movements. Fail. Even the satellite surveillance teams borrowed from the Americans get nothing but heat signatures and tire treads. It's as if the man has learned to step between the frames of the real. One local officer, frustrated, says, "We know where Riina sleeps, but we don't know where Bagarella breathes." During this time, Palermo has its last quiet spring. Markets buzz, children play football in alleyways, tourists walk cautiously through crumbling piazzas. But it's all illusion, a city on borrowed stillness. And then the first judge is killed. It's not Falcone or Borsellino, not yet. It's a smaller name, a warm-up, a test. The judge's car explodes outside his home. His wife survives, barely. His son doesn't. The funeral is televised. A sea of black coats, white roses, rain. Bagarella is seen that day, not at the funeral, but passing near the courthouse. A beggar claims he gave him coins. 2,000 lire. Then vanished. It's the kind of detail you don't know what to do with. Was it kindness? Distraction? A decoy? A few weeks later, another magistrate survives an assassination attempt. His driver is killed. Again, the whispers grow. Again, the name Leoluca surfaces, always just out of reach, like a door that won't quite open. What's chilling isn't the death toll. It's the silence that follows. Witnesses become forgetful. Cameras glitch. Transcripts go missing. Bagarella's world isn't one of violence. It's one of erasure, and in the middle of it all, he writes again. History punishes noise, but it forgets silence faster, so he keeps silent. And Palermo waits for the next boom. Death rides a Vespa, not in some poetic flourish. Literally, it's May 23rd, 1992. A warm Saturday evening. Sicilian families are setting tables, pouring wine, unwrapping fresh loaves of bread. Giovanni Falcone is returning to Palermo from Rome with his wife, driving along the A29 motorway, escorted by 3 security cars. What happens next is not chaos. It's choreography. Calculated. Impeccable. A bomb, nearly half a ton of explosives, is packed under a culvert near Kapaci. It detonates precisely as Falcone's convoy passes. The blast tears open the highway like paper. Falcone, his wife Francesca Morvillo, and 3 bodyguards die. The explosion registers on seismic monitors. Dust hangs in the air for hours, and across the island, time stutters. Palermo doesn't breathe. It doesn't scream either. It simply falls silent. The same kind of silence that Leoluca Bagarella perfected years earlier. Many people still think that Bagarella wasn't the architect of the Kapaci bombing, that it was Riina's plan, executed by others. But those who understand how Cosa Nostra worked in 1992, how messages were relayed, how hands stayed clean, point to a pattern. Bagarella wasn't seen, but his fingerprints were in the rhythm. In the weeks before the bombing, several key operators moved quietly around Palermo. Supply routes shifted. Back alley carpentries began receiving small packages labeled refrigerator parts. Surveillance teams later confirmed these were components for the triggering mechanism, built from scratch. And who coordinated that level of control? That surgical pacing? Leoluca. He doesn't touch the wires, but he touches the minds. Gives the order without giving the words. Uses looks, gestures, phrases with double meaning. There's a story, unconfirmed, like so many, about a Vespa, parked outside a mechanic's shop 3 days before the bombing, unattended. Its license plate traced to a shell company in Trapani. The name on the form? A pseudonym Bagarella used in the early 1980s. Coincidence or signature? And what of his reaction? After Falcone's death, he doesn't celebrate, doesn't gloat. Instead, he disappears entirely for 12 days. No sightings, no intercepted notes, just a city echoing with grief and ash, and a shadow gone even deeper underground. Those 12 days become myth. Some say he was in the Madoni Mountains, watching the coast from a cliffside house with no electricity. Others claim he flew briefly to Tunisia under a fake name, returning with nothing but a journal. A third story says he spent the entire time in a Palermo apartment above a bookstore, rereading the Divine Comedy. Whatever the truth, he reemerges more focused, sharper. He cuts ties with 2 lieutenants suspected of sloppiness, sends one abroad. The other disappears. His wife doesn't see him for 3 weeks. She leaves flowers on the table that wilt untouched. Another funeral follows, this one for Falcone. Tens of thousands gather. Judge Paolo Borsellino, Falcone's closest friend, stands at the front, weeping openly. That image, Borsellino with trembling hands, is published on front pages worldwide. And Bagarella? Watches from a distance, some say. From a hilltop, through binoculars, his expression unreadable. In one of his notebooks, dated a week after the bombing, he writes, "If they cut the tree, we bury the roots." Was he referring to Falcone, to Cosa Nostra, or to something more personal? Weeks pass. Then Borsellino dies too. Another car bomb. July 19th, 1992. Via D'Amelio. Borsellino is visiting his mother. The blast tears through 6 stories of concrete. 5 police escorts die with him. The city shudders again. This time, the response is different. Protests erupt. Not just quiet murmurs in cafes, but marches. Candles. White sheets hung from balconies with the word basta, enough. Mothers cry on national television. Children draw pictures of fire and angels. And still, no arrest for Bagarella. No trace, no slip-up. The man simply remains an equation no one can solve. One magistrate, newly appointed, reads through old transcripts and notes something strange. Bagarella is never mentioned with emotion, only function. Never angry, never nervous, never proud. Always present, always effective. It's as if his entire identity has been boiled down to a verb, to enact. There's an intercepted recording during this time. A low-level capo complains to a colleague. Riina makes messes. Leoluca makes disappearances. That same capo dies 2 months later. Found in a car trunk with a handkerchief placed neatly over his mouth. In 1992, Bagarella becomes more than a man. He becomes a condition. Police refer to him as Stage 0, meaning the moment before something happens. A place. A hush. A pause in the music before it plays its fatal note. A detective recalls a moment in August, walking past a butcher shop where the cleaver was too clean, the floor too quiet. It felt like a Bagarella place, he said. Nothing happened. But the feeling lingered for weeks. So what do you think? Could a man who speaks so rarely, who leaves no trail, actually command the fear of an entire country? Or maybe the silence is the trail. One final detail. Months after the Kapaci bombing, a letter is found. It's unsigned. Folded into a library book returned late to the University of Palermo. It reads, "We are not the thunder. We are the pause that made you notice it." When revenge goes quiet, it becomes doctrine. January 15th, 1993. Salvatore Riina is arrested in Palermo after 23 years on the run. The headlines explode. Journalists cheer. Television anchors lean into their microphones with disbelief. Il capo dei capi has fallen, but in a small room somewhere, lit by a single bulb and walled by soundproofing foam, Leoluca Bagarella sits unmoved. Riina's arrest doesn't feel like a loss, it feels like a pivot. Because where others saw collapse, Bagarella saw vacuum. And vacuums, like silences, are opportunities waiting to be disciplined. From the moment Riina is taken into custody, Palermo waits for the sky to fall. They expect noise, gunfire, turf wars, chaos. Instead, the city gets calm. An eerie kind. Supermarkets still open. Cars still idle at red lights. The espresso is still bitter and hot, but everyone knows something is shifting. The Corleonesi don't splinter. They coil inward. And from within that spiral, Bagarella rises. Not with ceremony or declaration, but with momentum. People begin referring to him not as capo, not as boss, but simply as il silenzio, the silence. He becomes the quiet overseer of the most methodical vendetta campaign Cosa Nostra has ever launched. Between 1993 and early 1994, bombings rock the cultural pillars of Italy. Not people, not prosecutors, but symbols. The Uffizi Gallery in Florence, the Lateran Basilica in Rome, the Via Palestro explosion in Milan. Art, history, beauty, all hit. Many people still think this was a desperate move by a crumbling mafia, but others believe it was Bagarella's plan to make the country feel like nowhere was sacred anymore. Not because of brutality, but because of unpredictability. Because who bombs a museum? Only someone trying to rewrite the rules. Police scramble. The public panics. Cultural institutions beef up security. Bagarella, meanwhile, grows quieter, more focused. He starts dressing differently, simpler still. Navy blue shirts, no collar stays, sand-colored shoes that don't leave marks on stone floors. His wife sees him rarely, and when she does, he speaks softly, sometimes not at all. There's a priest, anonymous, but known among those who track these things, who claims Bagarella confessed during this time, not about crimes, about responsibility. It's not vengeance, he allegedly said. It's geometry, action for action, pain to balance pain. A strange kind of confession, if it ever happened. The internal structure of Cosa Nostra shifts under his control. He reorganizes cells like clockwork. Everyone has a purpose. Everyone is replaceable. The family becomes a circuit, and he is the breaker switch. He establishes a network of couriers who never speak, literally, chosen for their muteness or trained in sign. Messages passed via folded paper, blinks, touches of the wrist. One such courier is captured in late 1993. Police search his bag. Nothing. Strip his clothes. Clean. But in the sole of his shoe, stitched in a double layer of leather, they find a note. 2 stars gone. 1 moon still watches. Move the olives. It's believed to be a reference to a planned hit on another judicial figure. The language is metaphor. The meaning? Clear enough to those who know. Bagarella no longer trusts the old codes. He invents new ones. Song lyrics, chess scores, even children's riddles. Messages are sent through local radio stations disguised as birthday shout-outs. A baker in Agrigento plays a jingle each time a shipment lands safely. It's as if Leoluca has stopped operating within the mafia. He's begun shaping his own private philosophy of crime. Less vendetta, more ritual, less bloodlust, more choreography. He grows reclusive. Only a handful of people are permitted to see him directly. Even fewer are allowed to speak to him. And those who do must sit at a specific distance, never closer than 2 arms' length. He carries a small silver pen and writes notes during conversation. never speaks twice. One informant, turned reluctantly under pressure, says the most terrifying moment of his life wasn't seeing Bagarella give an order. It was seeing him nod while buttering bread. "I knew what was coming," he said, "and I couldn't taste a single bite." So what do you think? Is this man unraveling? Or is he finally crystallizing into the purest version of himself? Some believe he started to write poetry in earnest during this time. Not haikus now, but longer verse. Sonnets, couplets. A collection allegedly titled Piombo e Petali, Lead and Petals. No copies survive, but a line from one poem is scratched into the underside of a dinner plate found during a raid. Even statues weep when the museum is empty. Meanwhile, the killings don't stop, but they change form. A judge collapses from a sudden heart attack. Later, a coroner finds traces of a compound that mimics cardiac arrest. A journalist is pushed in front of a train by someone no camera captures. A prosecutor's dog vanishes. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor resigns and moves to Lisbon. No bullets, no sirens, just precision. And still, the government can't prove anything. Surveillance teams say Bagarella is now using young boys as messengers, ages 8 to 10. No records, no suspicion. Each boy carries a toy. The message is hidden inside the toy's battery compartment. The boys never know what they're carrying. One boy later found says, "The man told me to walk slow and not drop the duck." That duck delivered instructions for a 3-man team to relocate from Naples to Genoa. One final detail. In February of 1994, Bagarella reportedly visits a hospital late at night. No appointment, no guards. A nurse sees him sit beside an elderly patient, a priest dying of emphysema. They don't speak. After 10 minutes, Bagarella leaves. The priest dies the next morning. His last words? He forgave no one, not even himself. Black lists and bullet lists, 2 different weapons, but in Leoluca Bagarella's hands, they carry equal weight. By 1994, the Sicilian mafia has been turned inside out. What once operated on whispers and codes has been fractured by arrests, wiretaps, and state informants. Riina is in prison, Provenzano is in hiding, and Bagarella, calm, surgical, and utterly unflinching, has taken up the scalpel. He's not interested in rebuilding the old order. He's interested in purifying it. The old dons were sentimental. They believed in rules, hierarchies, elaborate rituals with burning saints and prickled fingers. Leoluca believes in effectiveness, in the kind of authority that doesn't require tradition to stand. It needs only stillness, obedience, and the willingness to erase. He begins compiling names. Some are informants. Others are merely disloyal. A few are innocent, but happen to know too much. The list becomes its own instrument, a message. Everyone knows the list exists. No one knows how long it is, or whose name is next. And the terrifying part? People start volunteering to prove they don't belong on it. There's a prosecutor who suddenly drops charges against a suspected Bagarella associate. No explanation, no apology, just a handshake and a disappearing act. When asked by his peers why he backed down, he says, "Because I heard my name spoken by someone who shouldn't have known it." Many people still think that Bagarella operated without lists, that the idea of the list was a psychological tactic, not a document. But in a 2001 raid on a safe house in Terracini, authorities recovered a torn sheet of paper tucked behind a toilet tank. No names, just a symbol, an X, drawn 5 times beside small, evenly spaced dots. The dots corresponded to 5 men who had died in the preceding 2 months. Shot, poisoned, burned, erased. So what do you think? Did the list exist? Or did Bagarella invent something more powerful than proof? Fear shaped into an idea? He begins purging not just enemies, but the inefficient. One capo is dismissed simply for talking too much, another for being too visible at weddings. Bagarella's standards are mathematical. If a man generates more attention than silence, he's a liability. The press calls it a reign of terror, but Palermo doesn't feel chaotic. It feels ordered, like someone turned down the volume on the city, cleared the clutter, locked every drawer. Even the police agree. Crime drops. But so does noise. He becomes obsessed with symmetry. Associates report that he arranges objects on his desk in perfect alignment: pens, notebooks, even coins facing the same direction. In one apartment, a table is found with 4 coffee cups, each filled to the same level, each placed precisely a handspan apart. No fingerprints, just the smell of bitterness and ink. There's a whisper that he begins experimenting with rituals, not religious, but personal. A song played every Thursday, a particular jacket worn only on rainy days, a slice of orange eaten before every major decision. One man says Bagarella believes in cleansing moments, that before every act of violence he washes his hands not once but twice with lemon soap, always lemon. He orders a hit on a low-level courier suspected of being followed. The man is found in a vineyard, arms crossed, eyes open, a lemon placed neatly on his chest. The press calls it symbolic. Bagarella never comments. But lemon trees start disappearing from local markets. People begin removing citrus from their storefronts, just in case. A priest is found dead in a Palermo chapel. Heart attack, the papers say. But locals whisper it was because he gave up a name during confession. The name? Unknown. But someone swears the priest's last words were, "He told me not to blink." The poetic nature of these executions start to unnerve even seasoned investigators. One judge says, "It's like we're hunting a ghost with an MFA." Meanwhile, his wife, quiet, distant, and increasingly pale, withdraws further. She stops answering the door, stops speaking to neighbors. Her garden dies from neglect. The curtains stay drawn. Some say she keeps a notebook of her own, filled with prayers in pencil. Then another name is crossed off, a member of parliament. Corrupt, sure, but not connected directly to Cosa Nostra, dies in a boating accident. The anchor rope was cut. He drowned slowly, clinging to a life vest that someone had deliberately slashed. Authorities can't prove anything. But the man's secretary resigns the next day, citing a visit from someone with no shadow. And then comes the gallery bombing in Rome, 1994. A small, well-curated museum near the Tiber. The blast is modest, no casualties. But among the debris, a single scrap of paper is found. On it, a typed phrase, "Even marble remembers fear." The words are traced to a poem attributed, unofficially, to Bagarella. A new generation of mafiosi begins to idolize him, not for brutality, but for composure. They mimic his silence, imitate his stillness. Some even begin carrying small notebooks, quoting his alleged verses as if they were scripture. And yet the paradox grows. The more powerful he becomes, the less he is seen. One officer swears he followed him for a week, saw him at a fish market, a chapel, a rooftop bar. But every time he approached, Bagarella vanished. No exit, no vehicle, just gone, like smoke absorbed into sunlight. That officer retires 2 months later, writes no memoir. So what does this make him now? A man with a list? A myth with fingerprints? Or maybe, just maybe, Leoluca Bagarella has moved beyond mafia altogether and become something else. A force, a format, A silence that rewrites the room. The hard lines of loyalty start to blur, and that's what makes them dangerous. By early 1995, those still inside Cosa Nostra speak of Leoluca Bagarella in tones once reserved for saints and phantoms. Not loud, not reverent, just careful. His name doesn't rise above conversation, it sits underneath it, like a tide. Inside the organization, fear has transformed into something more complicated, devotion. Not the kind born from inspiration, but from awe. The kind of loyalty that doesn't demand affirmation because it exists without question. Bagarella, meanwhile, has stopped attending meetings in person altogether. He communicates through intermediaries, rarely the same person twice. Sometimes his messages arrive as full sentences. Sometimes they're just objects. A black ribbon on a door handle, a paper clip bent into a triangle, an unlit candle left on a dashboard, and yet his authority remains absolute. Many people still think that by this point, Bagarella had become irrational, that grief, paranoia, and isolation were beginning to distort his judgment. But others argue the opposite, that he was purifying the organization into something leaner, meaner, and far more ideologically focused. So what do you think? Had he lost the thread? Or was he sewing a new garment from the same dark cloth? His philosophy sharpens. He begins to speak of la disciplina, not as a concept, but a force, something structural, like gravity. One surviving associate recalls him saying, "Loyalty isn't love. It's the memory of consequences, and consequences in his world are never theoretical." A mid-level boss in Trapani sends an unapproved message to an overseas contact. The message isn't intercepted by the police. It's intercepted by Bagarella's men. The boss is found 2 days later in a boatyard, tied to an anchor. No note, no wounds, just silence. The message? It was a request for more product. A small overstep. An extra breath taken in the wrong room. That's all it takes. The hard lines are drawn with surgical ink. You either follow the rhythm, or you disappear into it. And the poetry, the strange, meticulous poetry, continues. In another raided apartment, police discover a typewritten page pinned behind a mirror. It reads, "The eye that watches too long becomes the light. The hand that hesitates becomes the blade. Beneath it, a chessboard, mid-game. The white king already fallen." These little artifacts become like religious relics to investigators. Pieces of a psyche they can't quite map. A detective describes it like trying to diagram a thunderstorm. "You can't chart madness," he says, "if it leaves no footprints." But madness isn't the word. Not for Bagarella. Madness stumbles. He moves deliberately. There's a turning point that many scholars agree upon, the moment when his leadership begins to shift from cold operational control into something deeper, more ideological. He starts instructing members to read. Not just ledgers, not just codes, but books, philosophy, military strategy. He reportedly gives copies of The Art of War to 2 young enforcers and tells them, "Don't kill until you understand Chapter 7. One of those men is found dead within a month, shot once behind the ear." A copy of the book, page 7, marked in pencil, is tucked into his coat. We don't know why, but the message is clear. There's also evidence that he begins compiling a new doctrine, notes on ethics, punishment, history. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about meaning. And what does meaning look like to a man who has spent decades in silence? It looks like patterns. He starts assigning operatives in groups of 3. Always 3. Never 4. Never 2. Why? No one knows. But everyone complies. He changes the meeting locations from urban cafes to remote ruins, abandoned monasteries, dry wells, an unused wing of an old hospital. These places aren't just chosen for discretion. They're chosen for atmosphere. He believes silence behaves better in hollow places. One survivor, an errand runner turned informant, recalls a meeting in a crumbling barn. He didn't sit. He stood near a broken window, watching a tree sway. He didn't speak for 6 minutes. We timed it, and when he did speak, all he said was, "One of you is lying," and then he walked out. No orders, just that. Within a week, one of the men was dead. The others never questioned who had lied. They didn't ask how he knew. They just accepted it. And this is where his loyalty starts to feel less like obedience and more like gravity. You don't question gravity. You learn to fall with it. Yet even gravity has limits. Whispers begin to surface about discontent, not open rebellion. Bagarella's reach is still too long for that. But fatigue. Men exhausted by the pressure of perfection, living under a code so strict that even thinking the wrong thing might bring a lemon to your doorstep. There's an old man, a former accountant for a shell company tied to Bagarella, who's asked during an interrogation what working under him felt like. The old man pauses, then says, "Like living inside a clock where every tick was your last chance to breathe correctly." Bagarella continues to reduce his contact with the outside world. Even his messages become more cryptic. One is sent to a lieutenant via cassette tape. No voice, just 17 seconds of ocean waves, followed by a church bell. The lieutenant changes his phone number, disappears for a month, and resigns upon return. Whatever the message was, it landed. And still, Bagarella's loyalty holds, because fear wrapped in ritual becomes belief. And belief, no matter how brittle, builds systems that are hard to crack. You might ask, was there love left in his circle? Did anyone admire him without the pressure of dying for it? No one can say. But one notebook found near the ruins of a former meeting place contains just a single line. "I do not want love, I want echo. So what do you think? Can loyalty born in fear ever be pure? Or does it just wear a cleaner mask?" In Leoluca Bagarella's Sicily, masks aren't lies, they're uniforms. And everyone knows what happens when you take off a uniform before you're told to. Rumors of prison poetry swirl like incense, drifting, fragrant, impossible to pin down. By mid-1995, investigators are close. Close enough that Bagarella can feel the edges of the net. But instead of running, he tightens his world even further. Fewer movements, fewer messages. The silence now isn't just strategy, it's sanctuary. And then something strange begins to surface. Not an informant, not a bank record. Poems, tiny verses, written on the backs of receipts, on the inside of jacket linings, scribbled between lines of coded instructions. They're not signed, but the handwriting, the sharp slanted rhythm, matches samples recovered from past hideouts. Forensic analysts match the ink formulas. Others match the phrasing, the cadences, the bizarre clarity. One note reads, "I have folded my voice into corners where even breath dares not follow." Many people still think this shift toward poetry was a crack in his psyche, that the years of silence finally found an outlet in verse. But others, journalists, scholars, even rival mafiosi, believe it was calculated. Another kind of encryption, a way to speak freely without saying anything at all. So what do you think? Was he unspooling into metaphor, or coiling tighter in language only the initiated could feel? In one of the poems recovered after his eventual arrest, the following lines appear. "They watched my hands, but not my paper. They traced my footsteps, but not my rhythm. Law enforcement, reading this later, admitted it wasn't just chilling, it was accurate. His men began to pick up the habit. One courier was found with a haiku tattooed on his forearm, no stars overhead, only footsteps that repeat, never far behind. Another enforcer kept a leather notebook filled with stanzas that read like confessions, threats, love letters, and orders, blended into something beyond translation. One poem was written in code. When cracked, it revealed coordinates. Those coordinates pointed to a shallow grave near Syracuse. Inside it, a police informant who'd been missing for 5 months. And yet, this poetic transformation wasn't all shadow. There were traces of grief, of memory, of something else. After his wife's quiet and gradual descent into mental illness, believed by some to have been triggered by the violence surrounding their life, Bagarella's writing took a somber tone. One poem, later found torn in half and burned at the edges, read, "She waters nothing now. The curtains do not move. Only the walls remember her. Her garden had long died. Her voice, once soft in evening prayer, hadn't been heard in over a year. Neighbors said she wandered sometimes, that she spoke to no one, that she once mistook her own reflection for her brother." Another note appeared later, taped beneath a dresser drawer in an abandoned villa. "I taught the house to be quiet, but it misses her singing. This isn't the kind of material investigators are trained to handle. A murder is a case. A drug shipment is evidence. But this was feeling, precision, pain folded into order. It made them nervous. One seasoned anti-mafia officer, when asked to review the recovered poems, refused. "You don't read that man's thoughts," he said. "You let them stay buried." But not everyone stayed away. Some criminologists began compiling the writings, arguing they offered insight into Bagarella's mind. Others argued they were bait, designed to mislead. Every stanza, a sleight of hand. There's one piece, undated, unsigned, but found inside a chapel used by several known Corleonese men, carved into a pew in perfect cursive. "The priest forgot my sins, but I still polish them with care. A visiting nun found it. She fainted. But what unnerves people most isn't the content. It's the calm. There's no rage, no pleading, just absolute, resigned awareness. A man who sees his end coming and decides to annotate it in verse. Police continue their chase. Bagarella is seen, but never caught. Once near Messina, walking with a limp. Another time near Trapani, entering a bakery and buying a single loaf of bread. But every time they close in, he's gone. It's during this final phase of freedom that the poetry peaks. He leaves behind not bullets, but metaphors. A rose pinned to a wall with a fountain pen. A piece of meat left uneaten on a plate beside a newspaper folded into an origami dove. Every object, a sentence. Every gesture, a stanza. One officer says, "It's like hunting someone who thinks in riddles. You're always 5 steps behind, and each footprint asks you a question." Meanwhile, the killing's slow, not because Bagarella is softening, but because his methods are becoming so refined, they don't need to be loud anymore. 2 betrayals are resolved with unsigned letters and empty envelopes. One man disappears after finding a book on his doorstep. Dante's Inferno, page 34, bookmarked with a black ribbon. Inside, a line underlined, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." When the man's house is later searched, they find a chair still warm, a cigarette burned to the filter, and an untouched plate of food. Gone. So what is this phase? A descent into madness? Or the final sharpening of a weapon that no longer needs to strike to be feared? Bagarella isn't trying to survive anymore. He's curating a legacy. One not of blood, but of precision, of silence. of literature wrapped in threat. And you, yes, you, reading this now, hearing this story, tracing these verses, maybe that was his point all along, to be heard, not seen, to be felt, not found, to become the whisper you carry into your own silence. Cracks in the concrete begin with breath. It's March 1995, and Palermo feels like a city holding a secret it can't quite keep. Something in the rhythm falters, barely, but enough. The way doors close too fast, the way a shopkeeper hesitates before saying hello. The silence feels overcorrected, like someone's trying too hard to keep it intact. And in that silence, a crack appears. The task force chasing Bagarella isn't new, but it's newly hungry. After years of chasing shadows, of reading poems instead of warrants, they stumble across something simple. A mistake. A wiretap on a low-level associate in Agrigento records a conversation that for once doesn't speak in metaphors. It's short, banal. Two men arguing about a delay in payment. One complains. He won't be happy. Leoluca's already waiting. Bagarella, spoken aloud, not hinted, not masked in poetry, said. It's the equivalent of thunder in a church. For weeks, they'd been tapping houses, cars, payphones, collecting fragments. A lemon in a bag, a candle placed in a windowsill, a chess move mailed to an empty apartment. But this is concrete. Many people still think that Bagarella's eventual downfall was inevitable, that no one can remain invisible forever. But others argue it was this slip, a single name spoken in the wrong tone, that set the machinery of his undoing in motion. So what do you think? Was it fate cracking the foundation or just human error finally catching up? Within days, surveillance intensifies. Every known associate is watched. Calls are intercepted. Mail is rerouted. One bakery, frequented by one of Bagarella's suspected couriers, receives a surprise inspection. No drugs, no guns. But behind a loose tile, they find a folded note. Leave the chessboard. Nights only. The message makes no sense, but it's enough to shift the focus. Authorities begin mapping movements around that bakery. Patterns emerge. Late-night walks. A woman in a red coat delivering bread but not collecting payment. A man who always parks 3 spaces away, never closer. The silence, finally, is echoing too loudly. One informant cracks, not entirely, but enough. Under pressure, he describes an apartment, top floor, no name on the buzzer, near Teatro Politeama. Inside, investigators find a single chair, a desk, and a map of Palermo with 5 streets marked in red thread. There's also a notebook, empty, except for a line on the final page. Even a shadow forgets its shape in enough light. The room is clean. Bagarella is gone. But the trail now is not cold. He's more careful than ever. But something's changed. He begins moving faster, rotating hideouts more frequently. His writing becomes erratic, still elegant, but darker. Investigators find one note hidden inside a book of psalms. I carved silence into stone, but the stone is cracking. And yes, it is. Multiple tips come in. One places him near Cephalou. Another says he's been spotted in a monastery, dressed as a caretaker. A third claims he left Palermo entirely, smuggled through Calabria in the back of a hearse. But they all have something in common. Urgency. The net is tightening, and Bagarella, once a ghost, is now just a man, hunted, tired, and very much real. Back in Palermo, the city changes again. It's subtle, but noticeable. The flowers in his wife's garden, dead for months, suddenly bloom again. A neighbor says she saw a man on the balcony at dusk, just standing, watching. He's back, or close, and then, finally, convergence. A routine search of a known associate's car turns up a receipt, a grocery bill. Normal, except for a scribbled phrase on the back. 2 lemons, 1 visitor, 6 a.m. The address links to an apartment on Via Bernini. Unassuming, beige, with a broken intercom. The task force moves in. It's still dark when they arrive. 6 unmarked cars, dozens of plainclothes officers. They expect resistance, a shootout, explosives, chaos. What they get instead is a door that opens without a knock. Inside, the apartment is silent, clean, air heavy with the scent of soap and ink. And there, at the far end of the hallway, sits Leoluca Bagarella. No weapon, no words. He's dressed in a dark coat, his hair slicked back, his eyes unreadable. On the table beside him, a chessboard, mid-game. His side, black. The white king tipped. He doesn't run. He doesn't blink. When officers move to cuff him, he raises his hands before they ask. There's a pause, just one breath long, before anyone speaks. One officer, younger than most, asks quietly, "Why didn't you leave?" Bagarella looks at him, eyes slow and tired, then says, "I already did." And that's it. No grand speech. No resistance. Just quiet footsteps echoing down a hallway as Palermo wakes up to a different kind of silence. One that finally feels like an ending. But even in handcuffs, he leaves a final signature. Inside the apartment, taped to the wall, is a single sheet of paper, written by hand, neat, centered. This was never about winning, only about making you listen. The city does, the country does, and somewhere, across quiet rooms and shuttered churches, the final crack in the concrete widens, not into collapse, but into history. A door kicked at dawn. That's how it ends. Not with blood, not with a siren, not even with a chase. Just a creak, a quiet surrender, and a country exhaling all at once. April 24th, 1995. After nearly 3 decades of slipping through the cracks, of becoming a myth wrapped in shadow, Leoluca Bagarella is arrested in a modest Palermo apartment. The headlines scream, but the man himself does not. Police find him alone. No bodyguards, no weapons, just a chessboard and a cold cup of espresso. The official statement from the Ministry of the Interior calls it a monumental victory in the war against organized crime. Television anchors call it the fall of Cosa Nostra's silent king. But in truth, the most remarkable part of the arrest is how unremarkable it is, because Bagarella doesn't resist. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Many people still think that this arrest broke the back of the Corleonese faction, that it marked the death of the Mafia's golden age. But others, quiet analysts, seasoned judges, believe Bagarella's capture only shifted the mythology, from movement to memory, from command to symbol. So what do you think? Is silence defeated when the body is taken? Or does it simply settle in the walls? The apartment is meticulously clean. 1 bedroom, 1 table. A single suit hung on a wire hanger. Next to the bed is a notebook, half filled. Police open it expecting codes, names, strategy. Instead, they find this: I wore silence like skin. When they peeled it, they found only more silence beneath. The investigators don't know what to do with that, so they take it, file it, and move on. At police headquarters, Bagarella is booked without incident. Fingerprints, mugshot, height chart. He does everything as if rehearsed. When asked his occupation, he replies, archivista, archivist. And maybe he's not wrong, because in that moment, he becomes a living archive of an era most would rather forget. He's placed in solitary, not for punishment, but for caution. No contact, no television, no radio. His meals are passed through a slot. He receives no visitors. His cell is monitored 24 hours a day. And still, he writes, on toilet paper, on the backs of legal forms, on soap wrappers. The guards begin to collect the fragments. Most are unreadable, some are chilling. If they buried me in concrete, I would teach it to listen. A psychiatrist is sent to evaluate him. She spends 40 minutes in the cell. When she exits, she says only, "He doesn't need a diagnosis. He needs a translator." His trial begins 6 months later. It is not televised, but the courtroom fills every day. Bagarella arrives in handcuffs, dressed in a simple black suit. No tie, shoes polished to a dull sheen. His expression never changes. He does not flinch at testimony, does not react to photos. He blinks only when necessary. The prosecution reads out the charges: multiple homicides, criminal conspiracy, terrorism, extortion, and more. The judge asks if he understands. He nods. Asked if he wishes to speak in his defense, he replies, "The stones have already spoken." The trial continues without his voice. Witnesses tremble. Lawyers lean on every comma. But Leoluca says nothing, not even when former allies take the stand. Not even when his own notes are used as evidence. He watches, expressionless, as pages of his poetry are projected onto courtroom screens. One reads, "I whispered to a city and it forgot how to scream." At sentencing, the judge delivers life imprisonment, plus additional years. The words echo, but Bagarella's stillness remains intact. Only once does he break form. As he is escorted from the courtroom, a journalist calls out, "Do you regret anything?" And Bagarella, turning slightly, replies, "I regret that they made it a story." That quote makes every front page the next morning. He is moved to a maximum security prison under Italy's Article 41 bis regime, designed for the most dangerous mafia inmates. 23 hours a day in a cell. No phone. No TV. Limited mail. Monitored conversations. No contact with other inmates. And yet, something slips through. The guards begin finding folded poems in odd places, taped behind fixtures, tucked into the seams of mattresses, etched into soap bars left behind when cells are cleaned. One found scrawled faintly onto the back of a cereal box. "You cannot cage what became the cage. Security is tightened. Cell inspections triple. Yet the fragments continue. It's not just the poetry, it's the pace." Bagarella begins slowing time. He eats in precise motions, washes at set intervals. Even his breathing, guards say, seems rehearsed. One psychologist watching via closed circuit says, "He's not in prison. He's inside himself." And still, Palermo doesn't quite relax. Years after his capture, locals speak his name the way you mention an old illness, respectfully, fearfully, and always with a glance over the shoulder. Some young mafiosi even cite him as inspiration, not for crime, but for control. He was a master of time, one says, of space. He didn't rule by terror. He ruled by never needing to. So what is left of a man like that? Behind concrete and steel, a legacy? A myth? A silence that learned how to write? Maybe all three. And in one final act of strange grace, a small paper is found in the prison library. Unsigned, undated, but unmistakable. It reads, "When you build a house from silence, you never run out of rooms." And the door, kicked open at dawn, is now just part of the floor. The last black suit he ever wears is not for court. It's for stillness. Inside the maximum security wing of the prison, time doesn't move. It waits. The light is fluorescent and unsympathetic. The walls hum faintly from electricity, and each footstep echoes longer than it should. Leoluca Bagarella settles into this rhythm without resistance. He doesn't complain. He doesn't ask questions. He folds into routine like paper folds into itself, perfectly creased, quiet, intentional. Each morning, he dresses in the same dark suit, black jacket, black trousers, crisp white shirt, no tie. Prison guards note the ritual. He smooths his sleeves, buttons each cuff slowly, then sits on the edge of his bed as if preparing for something that never quite arrives. Some guards whisper that he's still waiting for orders, that every day he suits up to receive something unseen, a coded message, a final mission. Others think he wears black as mourning, for himself, for Sicily, for a silence that finally had to speak. Many people still think this was affectation, a final act in a long performance. But those who observed him day in, day out, officers, doctors, even the priest who visited monthly, speak of something else, discipline. The black suit wasn't for appearances. It was armor, not against the law, but against decay. So, what do you think? When a man maintains his ritual inside a cage, is he resisting the walls or becoming them? His days take on a monastic pattern. Wake at 5 a.m., wash, dress, sit, eat, write, walk, repeat. But it's not hollow. Every motion is filled with intent, like a ceremony to keep his mind sharp. He refuses television, returns newspapers unopened, keeps books arranged by color rather than author. When questioned by a psychologist about why he chooses black each day, Bagarella simply replies, because silence doesn't stain it. There's a notebook, his prison issue, where he continues to write. Not plans, not letters, but verse. Always verse. One entry reads, "The day does not begin when the sun rises, but when the cell accepts it." He refuses to testify in any trial about Riina, about Provenzano, about anything. The courts beg. Judges offer leniency. Journalists speculate. He does not answer. Even during his own appeal hearings, he remains mute. Sometimes he closes his eyes and smiles faintly, as if listening to a conversation only he can hear. Prosecutors describe his silence as contempt. His lawyer calls it a right to non-performance. But behind closed doors, the guards start to call it gravity. Because once he's in a room, no one feels steady. His black suit becomes legend inside those walls. Inmates who glimpse him during rare courtyard transfers describe a figure who moves like a shadow cast in human form, always upright, always composed. One inmate claims he walked like time didn't apply to him. And then the letters start. Not from him, to him. Unmarked envelopes, some handwritten, some typed, all vetted, all censored. But they keep coming. Letters from strangers, sympathizers, curious admirers, aspiring poets, even law students. Each letter addresses him in the same way. Signor Bagarella. Never Don, never boss, always Signor. And he never writes back. Except once. A letter from a young student in Bologna, asking why he never turned state's witness. Why he never chose redemption. Bagarella writes, because even shadows must have loyalty. And what would a shadow be if it turned toward the sun? The letter arrives unsigned, but the handwriting is unmistakable. The ink, black. The signature, 3 dots. And that becomes his final flourish. 3 dots. Later, guards begin finding them everywhere. 3 tiny pencil marks on the underside of a table. 3 scratches carved into the door frame. 3 grains of rice, separated, arranged in perfect line beside his untouched bread. It becomes his punctuation. The black suit remains, year after year, even as it frays at the cuffs. even as the collar yellows, even as other inmates rotate through cells and seasons, and the outside world changes. He wears it the day Riina dies. He wears it the day Provenzano is pronounced senile. He wears it when he's informed, formally, finally, that he will never again see daylight without permission. And when a guard, new to the block, asks why he keeps wearing the same thing, Bagarella says only, "Because color is a luxury, and I gave up color long ago." His cell becomes a museum of quiet. A black jacket hangs even when he's not wearing it, like an absent flag. The notebook is always open to the last page used. The water cup is always placed precisely 1 inch from the edge of the table, and through it all, through every storm in Italy's courts, through every article, book, podcast, documentary, he says nothing. He is, to this day, the most high-ranking Cosa Nostra figure never to utter a single word under oath. So what remains? A black suit, a poem, a chessboard frozen mid-game, 3 dots scratched into concrete, and a silence so complete that even time holds its breath near him. Secrets sealed in silence are rarely buried. They're preserved. Years into his imprisonment, Leoluca Bagarella remains mute. Not a vow, not defiance, just habit refined into philosophy. He speaks only to himself, on paper, and even then, he chooses his words like weapons, sparingly, precisely, with the weight of consequence behind every stroke. Italy moves on, at least on the surface. New scandals emerge. New politicians fall. New mafias rise in Naples, in Calabria, in Rome. But Palermo still walks differently, still carries attention under the skin, because they know he's still alive, still inside, still watching, if not through eyes, then through echo. In 2002, guards discover something unusual during a routine cell inspection. Hidden behind a loose heating grate, folded with obsessive care, are 9 handwritten letters. Inked in black, addressed simply, per lei, for her, the recipient is never named. But the letters are unmistakably to his late wife, Ninetta Riina's sister, the woman who stood at the edge of his world, mostly invisible, but always present. She had passed away some time earlier in a psychiatric hospital after years of silence herself, a life unraveling quietly in parallel to his. And these letters, so clean, so full of absence, are unlike his usual cold, calculated verse. One reads, "They took you from the garden, not your body, just your voice." Another, "The curtains still move as if you're walking by. Even the walls remember." Many people still think Bagarella stopped feeling after her death, that the silence that followed was just the residue of shock calcified into routine. But the tone of these letters suggests something else, not grief, not guilt, reverence. He never sends them, never shares them. They aren't addressed for the courts, or the press, or his men. They're for her, and by extension, for no one. Because she, like him, became a figure erased by purpose. So what do you think? Does a man who built his legend on silence break that rule in grief? Or is this grief simply another extension of silence? After the letters are logged and archived, prison officials change procedures. They check cells more frequently, ban certain materials, swap guards more often. But nothing else is found. No new poems, no more coded chess games, until 2005. A second search reveals something carved faintly behind the baseboard of his bunk. Not a message, not a confession, a name. Malena, her name. Beneath it, 3 dots. That's when the guards begin paying more attention to the rhythm of things. How long he holds his spoon, how he folds his towel, how often he gazes at the window he cannot open. And they notice something. He's not looking out. He's looking through, It becomes evident that Bagarella is doing something rare in the world of organized crime. He's mourning, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the same intensity he once reserved for planning murders and hiding routes. He mourns like a ledger balancing itself after decades of cold arithmetic. During this time, his poetry changes again. A new journal is discovered. Inside, softer entries. Less venom, less control. One poem reads, "Even a ghost needs a name whispered once more to stay whole." Another, "If I dig enough silence, do I reach your voice?" Investigators and psychologists take interest. Scholars begin re-evaluating his collected writings, noting a tonal shift from command to confession. And yet, still, no apology. There is no repentance in Bagarella's work, no plea for forgiveness, only acknowledgement. He does not ask the world to understand him. He simply records what it never saw. One entry, "History is a door that only opens from the outside," and maybe that's all he was ever doing. Sitting behind the door, scribbling verse in the dark, waiting to see if anyone would knock. Another curious find comes in 2007. A small envelope, addressed to no one, placed behind a loose floor tile. Inside, a torn piece of a newspaper from 1993, the day after Riina's arrest. The headline circled in pencil. Next to it, a single note. When the voice fell, the echo remained. What that means, no one knows. Is it loyalty? Is it resentment? Is it both? Mafia historians debate endlessly whether Bagarella felt betrayed by Riina's capture, whether the voice refers to the boss or to the movement itself. But no answer is ever confirmed. And of course, Leoluca offers none. In interviews, former Corleone soldiers speak of him like an artifact. "He never cracked," one says. "He became the wall." Another, "You could lose your way in the silence he left behind." Prison officials eventually grant him access to a single hour of outdoor time each day. He walks the same circle, same number of steps, every turn taken precisely at the same point. Guards mark it. He never deviates. One guard, after weeks of observation, mutters, "He's still patrolling." Because that's the thing about Bagarella. He doesn't adjust to prison. He integrates it, turns routine into religion, converts structure into sanctuary, and in doing so, he seals his secrets behind a wall no court can breach. A final note found in the corner of a desk drawer. Unsent, unsigned. I built a city out of silence, and no one ever found the gates. The judge who cried after sentencing wasn't a rookie. He wasn't fresh from law school, or soft in the heart, or weak in the knees. He'd presided over mafia cases for more than 20 years, had seen the worst Palermo could conjure. He'd signed warrants for men who laughed during sentencing and handed down life terms to murderers who blinked twice and disappeared into chains. But when he sentenced Leoluca Bagarella, something inside him cracked. It wasn't the charges. Those were expected. Homicide, extortion, conspiracy, terrorism. It wasn't the evidence. There was enough to bury a dozen men. It wasn't even the poetry, though the notebooks, passed in silence through court clerks, sat on the bench like tiny landmines. It was the presence. Bagarella didn't speak during the sentencing. He stood as asked, hands behind his back, eyes steady. The black suit, perfectly pressed. The same worn shoes. No tie. And when the judge, reading through the sentencing summary, paused for breath, Bagarella did something that unsettled everyone. He nodded, once as if confirming the weight of the life he'd just been handed. Many people still think the judge wept from pity. That, faced with the shell of a man who had once commanded half of Sicily's bloodline, he felt a flicker of mercy. But others, those close to him, said it wasn't that. It was the realization that even justice can arrive too late. So what do you think? Can a sentence carry meaning if the man already buried himself beneath it? Later, in a private statement never meant for the press, the judge would write, "It felt like sentencing a cathedral, not because of holiness, but because of weight." And that weight lingers. After the verdict, Bagarella doesn't flinch. He returns to his cell, sits, removes his jacket, folds it across the chair, writes a single line in his notebook. Time does not pass here. It holds its breath. From that moment on, he stops participating in all legal proceedings. His lawyers visit, plead, encourage him to appeal. He refuses. He won't sign. He won't speak. He won't ask. It's not defiance. It's withdrawal. A vanishing act in slow motion. He begins reducing his already minimal routine. No more outdoor hour. No more reading. No more books. His meals shrink. He eats less, sleeps less, but never appears weak. His silence deepens. Even guards, those used to the endless monotony of long-term sentences, say his presence shifts the space around him. One says, "He made the air denser, like you had to walk slower near his cell." He starts placing 3 grains of rice on his tray. Every meal, no matter what's served. Always 3, never eaten, never explained. A psychiatrist, assigned to check in quarterly, begins documenting what she calls ritual compression. She notes that Bagarella seems to be distilling himself, refining his presence until nothing is left but structure. She writes, "He is reducing himself into shape, like a statue, but one that is being carved from the inside." And still the letters come. Even years into his sentence, letters trickle in from those fascinated, confused, reverent. Some are from young criminals seeking mentorship, some from academics asking for permission to quote him, some from strangers, just hoping to understand the stillness they read about. He answers none of them, except one, a child, 12 years old, from Palermo. The boy writes a single paragraph asking, "Why did you hurt people?" and then stop talking. The reply arrives 3 weeks later, typed, unfolded with clean edges, because sound made things worse. The prison holds the letter for weeks, uncertain whether to deliver it. Eventually, they return it to archives. The boy never hears back, but the message echoes. The judges who once presided over his world, the officers who once tracked him across continents, all begin to age, retire, die, and Bagarella stays, fixed, anchored, the last ghost standing. There's a myth that grows during this time, that anyone who stands outside his cell too long hears things, not voices, not noise, memories, a whispered prayer from a mother, the cry of a child behind a closing door, the sound of a shutter falling on a street before a murder, all in their own heads, of course, but all eerily specific, and whether it's superstition or guilt, prison officials start rotating guards more frequently around him, 1 every 6 weeks. No exceptions. One young officer, new to the system, breaks protocol, leaves a copy of Dante's Purgatorio on Bagarella's cot. Inside, a note, "You built hell, but maybe you can still climb." The next day, the book is returned, untouched, except for a bookmark inserted on Canto 3. The passage, "I am not Aeneas, I am not Paul," a line about unworthiness, about the danger of presuming one can climb the mountain at all. The book remains in the prison library. Others begin referring to Bagarella, not by name, but by number. Cell 41, the black suit, the archivist, the one who never spoke. Each name a new myth, a new armor, but he doesn't seem to care. He folds his clothes, watches his walls, and once, just once, hums a song no one recognizes. 3 notes, then silence, locked up but not let go. That's the contradiction of Leoluca Bagarella's existence after the courtroom doors closed and the world assumed he had faded. Physically, he is contained. Concrete, steel, cameras, routine. But presence? influence? That seeps through cracks you can't seal, because power, once it's shaped into fear, doesn't vanish. It lingers, it echoes, it adjusts. And Leoluca never needed a phone line to be heard. Many people still think that once under 41 bis, Italy's strictest prison regime, Bagarella became a relic, a statue behind bars. But something happens in the early 2000s that stirs that belief. Something strange, a pattern. First, it's a lawyer in Naples who receives an anonymous envelope. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside is a single phrase: "What was forgotten will be repeated." Weeks later, the lawyer, who'd been preparing a new racketeering case against Cosa Nostra's remains, withdraws. No explanation. Then, a mid-level trafficker in Calabria suddenly changes legal counsel after a private visit. That new counsel files motions with uncanny precision, targeting loopholes so obscure that even court clerks whisper, "This feels like someone's handwriting." Bagarella never leaves his cell, never makes a call, never touches a pen under supervision. So what's happening? Guards begin noticing folded scraps inside his laundry. 3 creases, perfectly aligned, like origami envelopes. Always blank, always cleaned. But every time, the laundry is returned to different hands. Coincidence? Hard to say. A whisper moves through the corridors. He still sends signals, and that's where his legacy mutates. Because influence doesn't always mean instruction. It can mean anticipation. His old allies begin acting as if he's still giving commands, as if the absence of his voice is a form of guidance. So what do you think? Can a man control a world by simply not intervening? In one of the rare court depositions that leaks to the press, a former Bagarella courier says under oath, "We don't wait for orders, we wait for stillness." The phrase stuns the room. Not because of what it reveals, but because it's the first time someone has described Bagarella's leadership not in motion, but in absence. And absence becomes ritual. In 2006, a lawyer smuggles out a drawing. It's not of a person or a place. It's just a symbol. 3 concentric circles, 1 shaded, 1 open, 1 dotted. Investigators believe it's meaningless. But cross-referencing surveillance reports shows something strange. 3 safe houses searched during that same month all had 3 doors. All spaced in equal proportion. All abandoned days before the raids. Again, no proof, just rhythm. And if Leoluca Bagarella is a master of anything, it's rhythm. A priest visiting the prison under the guise of weekly confession, standard even for high-security inmates, later reports that Bagarella only said 3 things during their meeting. "They're building noise again. The ink is still flowing, but the paper grows thin." The priest, shaken, tells no one for months, then retires early. Around the same time, a low-ranking mafioso in Catania is found with a notebook. Inside, notes about supply chains, shipments, names. But in the center, a small poem. Black suit, no breath, still watching. It becomes clear, Bagarella isn't giving commands. He's become a template. Young mafiosi begin copying his style. They dress simply, speak less, quote his poems. One group even begins each meeting with a recitation of the same line. "The stones have already spoken." The phrase taken from his trial becomes doctrine. Guards notice strange behavior in the prison's library. Certain books, particularly volumes of Camus, Dante, and obscure Sicilian poets, are borrowed often but never returned. Later, they find them hidden in walls, pages dog-eared to match the numbers of known Cosa Nostra code phrases. It's not communication, it's myth construction, because even without action, Bagarella is still shaping thought. The way his followers see punishment, the way they define loyalty, the way they interpret silence as instruction. One lawyer says it best during a closed-door government meeting. He doesn't have to lead anymore. He just has to exist. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Bagarella's habits evolve. He begins waking later, writing less, staring longer. He folds his food napkin 3 times after each meal, always with the same pattern. Guards begin preserving these napkins, unfolding them, checking for ink, scent, thread. They find nothing, but the napkins keep coming. 3 folds, 3 dots. One guard jokes darkly. He could be sending signals in his breathing and we wouldn't know. Bagarella never confirms, never denies. He simply continues. And perhaps that's his final act, turning legacy into routine. Because even in chains, behind glass, surrounded by laws and cameras and clocks, he never deviates, never slips, never indulges. He becomes more of himself, which raises a question. Not when will he die, but will he ever fade? Because when a man turns silence into scripture, and stillness into scripture's echo, can bars really contain him? Or do we just wait quietly for the next folded page, his wife's death, and the silence after? It wasn't the kind of silence Bagarella knew how to weaponize. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't composed. It was empty in a way that pulled everything else into it. Like a cathedral after midnight, or a house where someone used to hum. Her name was Malena, sister to Riina's wife, Ninetta, once described in whispers as the quiet woman behind the quiet man. She had lived most of her life in the shadows of headlines, her voice buried beneath the noise of bombs and arrests. But she was there, always, until she wasn't. Malena died alone in a psychiatric facility. No visitors in her final weeks, no candles lit, no goodbyes from the family that once measured power in blood. The news reaches Bagarella on a Tuesday morning. The guard delivering it expects something. A twitch, a blink, maybe a line of verse. But instead, he gets nothing. Leoluca takes the folded paper, reads the single sentence. She passed this morning, and folds it again, smaller and smaller, until it can no longer be seen. Then he places it under his tray and finishes his breakfast. Many people still think that this moment broke him, that whatever ritual and rhythm he had built to keep his mind intact finally collapsed. But others, especially those who had studied him for years, believe the opposite, that her death didn't unravel his silence. It perfected it. So what do you think? Can the final loss of love complete a man like Leoluca, or erase what little of him was still human? The following week, guards report a change. He stops writing. No more notebooks, no soap poems, no haikus etched with fingernails into the underside of the desk. His journal remains open on the last page used. 3 dots. No ink since. He eats less, sleeps more, and every evening, at exactly 6:45 p.m., he stands facing the cell wall for 5 full minutes. Nothing in his hands, no movement, just standing. As if waiting for something to appear, it becomes clear to the staff. Something inside him has gone quiet in a new, unfamiliar way. One guard writes in the daily log, he hasn't spoken in 12 years. Now he isn't thinking either. But then strange things start to appear. Not words, objects. A small rock placed on the windowsill. Smooth, round, the kind you'd find in a garden or a river. A single black thread wrapped around the leg of the desk. A piece of orange peel, shaped like a crescent moon, left perfectly centered on his plate. None of them carry meaning on their own. But in the context of a man who once shaped his whole legacy around implication, they feel like echoes. One priest visiting the prison describes the change as the silence between notes growing longer, still music, just slowing. Then, a month after Madalena's death, a folded handkerchief is discovered under his pillow. Embroidered in the corner, almost too faded to read, MB, her initials. He keeps it there. Guards aren't sure how it got in. They didn't issue it. She hadn't sent him anything in years. But now it's there, and they don't take it, because for the first time since his arrest, Bagarella looks vulnerable. Not weak, not broken, just mortal. There's a story, never confirmed, that she once visited him early in his incarceration. They were separated by glass. She didn't speak. He didn't speak. She placed her hand on the barrier. He looked down at it. Then she left. One of the guards who witnessed it later said, "It was the most love I've ever seen with the fewest movements." After her death, the letters stop. Not just his, but the ones arriving for him. No admirers, no poems, no legal requests. It's as if the world, sensing the shift, lets go. But one letter does arrive. A month later, unmarked. No return address. Inside, a single sentence. She waited longer than any of us deserved. The handwriting matches no one in his known circle. He doesn't respond. He just folds the letter once and places it under the mattress. Not with the rest. Separate, untouched. In rare conversations, prison staff begin referring to him differently. Not the boss, not the poet. Just the man in 41. They stop expecting anything from him. Not a word, not a gesture. He becomes part of the facility, like the radiator or the flickering light in Hall B. But for those who remember, who watched Sicily tear itself apart, who read his words, who feared the way his name moved without being said, his silence now feels like a final stanza, a line left unfinished. One priest says it best. It's not that he stopped speaking, it's that the world finally stopped listening. And so the days turn. Leoluca Bagarella wakes, folds his blanket, places the handkerchief with her initials on the desk, and begins another rotation of ritual without reason. Because she's gone, and the silence that remains is no longer sharp. It's soft, heavy, and perfectly, irreversibly still. Hidden letters, burned names. This is what's left when memory starts slipping through the cracks of ritual. Years pass. Leoluca Bagarella, once the enforcer in shadows, once the man whose silence frightened even the fearless, has become something else entirely. Still present, still breathing, but receding. Not into weakness, but into opacity. Like a painting faded by time, but never scrubbed clean. He no longer writes. Not in any official sense. Not in the poetry that once traveled through walls and frightened lawyers and fascinated criminologists. But that doesn't mean he stopped communicating, because now the message isn't ink. It's what he chooses not to preserve. Many people still think that all of Bagarella's writings were collected and cataloged by the state. That everything he left behind, every page, every cryptic phrase, every lemon-scented scrap of metaphor, was carefully stored. But they're wrong, because something begins to emerge inside his cell, or more precisely, disappear. Tiny signs, faint scorch marks near the base of the toilet, ash inside a tea tin, a faint smell, burned paper now and then. He's burning things. No one sees him do it. Surveillance doesn't catch the act. But the pattern is undeniable. Pages vanish. 1 week, his mattress is lifted, and a half-charred note is found inside a metal spoon. The words barely legible. Not all names were for keeping. So what do you think? Is he erasing history out of guilt, or just tightening the archive? One guard, new, alert, too curious, sneaks a glance at one of the fragments before it's confiscated. It contains only a list of first names. 4, all male, all common. No surnames, no dates, no context. But later, in a quiet conversation with an anti-mafia task force member, the same names come up, linked to a 1980s disappearance case, officially unsolved, widely attributed to the Corleonesi. There's no legal use for the fragment, no chain of custody, no formal witness. It doesn't even exist anymore. The guard who found it was transferred shortly after, but the implication lingers, because Bagarella, even in decay, is still curating. There's a wooden chair in his cell, not prison-issued, brought in years ago for back support, officially, but carved into its underside are faint lines, not deep, not decorative, measured, intentional. The guards trace them and realize it's a grid, coordinates, cross-referenced with an old map of the Sicilian countryside. The lines intersect near a now-abandoned farmhouse once owned by a Riina cousin. A raid follows. Nothing is found. But soil samples later show signs of disrupted ground. Years ago, the house had been empty for over a decade, but the lines under the chair had been added recently. Fresh impressions, sharp cuts. Why mark it now? Maybe guilt, maybe mischief. Maybe Bagarella is still playing chess, just without opponents. Then comes the envelope, late 2008. A plain brown package arrives at a Palermo courthouse. No return address. Postmarked locally. Inside, 3 things. A single photograph of a burned notebook, scorched but not destroyed. A page of handwritten verse, unsigned but unmistakably his. Fire forgets nothing. It only tells memory to hush. A matchbook from a long-closed cafe in Montreal. No fingerprints, no DNA, no trail. Investigators assume it came from someone inside the prison. Maybe a sympathetic guard. Maybe a courier still loyal to the echoes of the Corleone code. But the reality is harder to pin down. Bagarella, behind the highest walls Italy can build, is still managing to shape the narrative. He's not publishing manifestos. He's not sending threats. He's just nudging, quietly, elegantly, from ash. Around this time, a prison chaplain tells a story. One evening, walking past Bagarella's cell, he hears him mutter, just once. Not a full sentence, not a prayer, just a name. The chaplain doesn't say which name. Says he forgot. But the expression on his face suggests otherwise. That it's a name heavy enough to ruin sleep. Maybe it was hers. Maybe it was Riina's. Maybe it was one of the burned ones. We'll never know. Because the next day, Bagarella is quiet again. Not stubborn, not defiant, just silent, like a room after the lights are turned off. In rare internal reports, prison officials begin to note a term not usually found in institutional documentation. Reverence. They don't mean respect. They mean caution wrapped in understanding. That this man, sitting alone, thin, gray-haired, now folding paper scraps like prayers, still changes the air when he moves. He gets fewer visitors each year. His lawyers age and retire. His enemies die or fade. The state forgets to update his file photo. The press moves on to new villains, but Bagarella remains. One final artifact surfaces. A library cart rolls down the corridor. Routine. On the bottom shelf, stuck between 2 dictionaries, a single torn slip of paper. Some names I carry, others I burn, but none leave me. It's unsigned, but no one questions who wrote it, because even now, decades after his last command, his last poem, his last known order, he remains a presence, not in violence, not in command, but in the slow, careful way paper catches fire. By 2010, Leoluca Bagarella is no longer discussed in newspapers, not in the way he once was. His name appears only in footnotes, old headlines, the back corners of forgotten legal reviews. But inside the prison, he's still a center of gravity. He no longer speaks. That's been true for years. But now he rarely moves. His routines have compressed into something nearly monastic. He wakes at dawn, folds his bedding, sits in his chair, and stares at the opposite wall. Occasionally, he'll sip lukewarm tea. Occasionally, he'll tap a rhythm, 3 slow knocks, against the edge of his tray. Never 4, Always 3. It's been nearly 15 years since his arrest, and yet the space around him still doesn't feel empty. It feels charged, not with threat, but with memory. Many people still think that by this point, Bagarella had finally become what the system wanted him to be, a silent, broken man. But there are others, those who study criminal behavior, trauma, power, who say no, that what he's done is rarer, stranger, that he hasn't faded, he's distilled. So what do you think? Is it possible for a man to become more dangerous after he stopped moving? Guards report that newer inmates, young, twitchy, full of bravado, go quiet when walking past his cell. Some of them don't even know who he is. They just feel it. There's one story. A guard overheard a conversation in the yard. 2 inmates were arguing. One threatened the other. Loud, dramatic. Until one of them said, "Go ask cell 41 what happens when you scream too loud." Neither spoke again for the rest of the week. The legend has mutated. He's no longer Riina's enforcer, not just the poet, not just the man who went silent. He's all of it. A composite myth stitched into the brickwork. Some guards call him the Echo, and that's fitting, because he no longer creates ripples directly, but things still bounce off him, still curve around him, still behave differently when he's present. An older inmate, a once feared Camorra lieutenant, asks to be moved to another block. His reason? "I dream in verse now. I never wrote a word before." He doesn't explain further. Around this time, a minor scandal emerges. A sociology PhD student had been corresponding with Bagarella for months, claiming it was part of her research. She never received any direct replies, but continued sending long, detailed letters. When questioned, she insists that he answers, just not on paper. Her supervisor suspends the project. One of her letters, leaked online, includes a passage she claims is inspired by him. "I do not shout, because the wind in these halls carries smaller things further." Critics call it fantasy, romanticism, but it goes viral in quiet corners of the internet. Reddit threads, obscure forums, true crime message boards where people refer to Bagarella only as the last quiet one. He never confirms any of it. But then a peculiar event occurs. A guard finds a folded napkin in the trash near his cell. Nothing unusual, except written on the inside, in soft pencil, "Not a ghost, not yet." No signature, no context. But the handwriting matches earlier samples. When asked about it, Bagarella merely tilts his head. Not an acknowledgement, just tilts, like he's hearing something no one else can. And then comes the storm. An internal review of the 41 bis program, spurred by pressure from human rights groups, suggests that prolonged isolation without stimulation may amount to psychological erosion. Bagarella's case is cited multiple times. Journalists start sniffing around again. A newspaper in Milan runs a piece titled, "The Man Who Unlearned the World." The article speculates about his mental health, his silent protest, and whether he's even aware of time anymore. The piece includes a timeline of his known behavior: 1995, arrest, 1996, trial and sentencing, 1998, first known poem, 2002, complete withdrawal from speech, 2007, final written line logged, 2010, unverified whisper, one word, rain. That last entry is controversial because no one else heard it, only a priest, and even he wasn't sure. But he said this: it wasn't like sound, more like the idea of sound. Strange, right? Because in a world where people post every breath online, Bagarella's silence has become louder than noise. One professor of philosophy at the University of Bologna gives a lecture titled Bagarella and the Ethics of Withholding. He argues that the man represents a rare inversion of the criminal arc, not from loud to defeated, but from action to aesthetic. He has become an artwork of omission, the professor says, a sculpture carved from absence. The clip gets shared, debated, mocked, praised. Meanwhile, inside his cell, Bagarella folds his napkin 3 times, places it on his tray, and stares at the wall. Stillness, precision, stillness. One day, a new guard, young, impatient, asks him, "Why don't you just say something? Anything?" Bagarella looks at him, not with contempt, not with threat, just gently, and then very softly he taps the tray. Once, twice, thrice. The guard walks away and never speaks of it again. And perhaps that's the final evolution. Bagarella no longer needs words, no longer needs violence, not even myth. He is myth now, wrapped in silence, burned into routine, waiting for what? Who knows? Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Some say that by 2015, Leoluca Bagarella has become less man, more artifact. He no longer reacts to seasons, to visitors, to light. He rises and rests by rhythms no one can quite track. Not clocks, not routines, not even biology. It's as if he's synced to some quieter metronome, one that ticks in memories instead of minutes. And his name, well, it barely appears now, not in the press, not in police bulletins, not even in whispered Sicilian kitchens where stories of the old guard used to carry weight between spoonfuls of pasta and fear. He is somehow both present and archived, like a cold case no one dares close. Many people still think Bagarella's influence died with Riina, that once the beast was buried, the shadows thinned, the hierarchy collapsed, and the last strings were cut. But others, investigators, sociologists, those who study the afterlife of organized violence, believe otherwise. Because silence doesn't mean absence. So what do you think? When a figure no longer speaks, writes, or moves, does that mean he's gone? Or simply that he's decided you're not worth the energy? Bagarella has become an unchanging frame, but the world around him still twitches in response. Take the young inmate assigned to kitchen duty, transferred from a smaller prison in Calabria, full of nerves and ego. He brags about his uncle's time with the Ndrangheta, claims he once delivered a message to a Riina nephew, says Bagarella's just an old man in a box. 2 days later, he asks for reassignment. No incident, no altercation, just a moment in the hallway, passing cell 41, and he stops speaking. Literally, a full mutism for 3 days. Medical staff intervene, no diagnosis. When he recovers, he refuses to say what happened, only writes, "He looked through me." Guards notice another change. Bagarella now stacks his meals. Literally, he begins placing his dishes one atop another. Cup in bowl, bowl on tray, utensils arranged in a perfect line beside them. Always facing north. Why, no one knows. But the stack is always there. Balanced, steady. A quiet little ritual, like a shrine to precision. He begins humming too. Not music, not melody, just vibration. A low, barely there sound, somewhere between a sigh and a hum, emerging from him in the late hours of night. Once, during a blackout, a younger guard patrolling with a flashlight hears it. The beam catches Bagarella sitting upright in his bed, eyes open, humming that unplaceable tone. When the lights return, he's already asleep, or pretending to be. A prison psychologist is brought in to assess him. She sits across the glass, observes, takes notes. Bagarella doesn't blink for 5 minutes. Eventually, she writes in her report, "He is no longer resisting us. He is simply waiting." But waiting for what? No parole, no visitors, no appeals. His few surviving relatives have distanced themselves. Even loyalists of the old order, those who once carved his words into code, have moved on or vanished. Yet still, every few months, something slips through. A line of verse scribbled on a bathroom wall in Naples, a phrase whispered during an arrest in Trapani, even a chalk symbol. 3 dots over a single line, drawn on the steps of a Palermo courthouse. They're never signed, never sourced, but always the same cadence, the same hush. He is not gone. someone tells a journalist off record. He's just underwater now. Meanwhile, inside the cell, Bagarella has taken to collecting dust. Not deliberately, of course, but he doesn't wipe it away. His shelf, once perfectly clean, now carries a thin gray film. His cup, left untouched, begins to stain. The folded napkin with Madalena's initials, it remains, slowly yellowing at the corners. It's as if time is finally allowed to settle on him. Uninterrupted, no polish, no pretense, just decay with dignity. A priest visits once a month now, recites the same passage each time, no response. But during one visit, as the priest turns to leave, Bagarella taps the glass 3 times. The priest turns. Bagarella mouths a single word. Neve, snow. He says it without sound, just breath and motion. The priest, startled, says nothing, just nods. Later, he writes in his journal, "It wasn't a memory, it was a request." Strange, isn't it? Because snow was never part of his story. Born in the heat of Sicily, raised in the dust and fire of mafioso struggle, snow has no place there. Unless what he's trying to say is this: cover it, quiet it, let it fall, let it all fall soft. The past, the names, the weight of it all, let it fall like snow. And if that's the case, then maybe the last transformation isn't one of power or control, but of surrender. A very slow, very deliberate surrender. Not to guilt, not to the law, but to stillness. Because Bagarella's not performing anymore. He's settling. And the man who once walked in shadow, who burned names and whispered verse, is now becoming part of the wall, not against it, of it. The year turns again, 2020. Bagarella's name has all but vanished from public discourse. No fresh documentaries, no true crime retrospectives, no sensational anniversary specials. The world, it seems, has moved on. But inside Cell 41, time hasn't accelerated. It hasn't even slowed. It stopped. He is 78 now. Frail, but not collapsed. The broadness of his shoulders is still visible beneath the prison linen, but it's more ghost than presence. His hair is thinned, silvered, swept neatly as ever. His hands still fold with care, still rest with purpose. But their strength is a memory wrapped in skin. He no longer taps, no longer stacks. The rituals have faded like old ink under sunlight. Instead, he waits. Each day is an echo of the last. The guards, mostly rotated out by now, treat him less like an inmate and more like infrastructure. He's there. He doesn't ask. He doesn't resist. He just is. A new warden tries to initiate a psychiatric review. The staff push back. There's no behavior to flag, they say. No outbursts. No decline. Nothing measurable. The psychologist who once called him distilled offers an amendment. He's not deteriorating. He's just beyond language. And perhaps that's it. Because what do you do with a man who no longer demands anything? Who has mastered the art of presence without interference? Who lives, breathes, and occupies space with the precision of a paperweight on a desk no one uses anymore? Many people still think the mafia is about brutality, money, and blood. But the mafia, at its coldest, is about permanence. About what outlasts. So what do you think? Is this what victory looks like for a man like Bagarella? To be the last one left, silent, untouched, and watched not for danger, but for something deeper. Reverence, maybe? One of the few remaining guards, older now himself, writes a letter to his son. He includes this line: "He doesn't scare me anymore, but I still lower my voice when I pass him." Isn't that something? There are no more letters, no reporters asking to speak, no enemies to outmaneuver, no allies to protect, just a cell, a man, and a silence that seems to bloom out of his ribs like moss over marble. And then something changes. He falls ill, not dramatically, No emergency, just weaker, paler, less able to rise. He misses breakfast for the first time in decades. When they find him, he's still awake, sitting on the floor, legs crossed. He has removed his mattress and placed it against the wall. His back is to the door. On the floor in front of him, arranged carefully, a folded handkerchief, a single piece of bread, a square of light slanting in from the window, nothing else. When asked if he wants help, he says nothing. Of course, when asked again, he lifts one hand and makes a small gesture. Not dismissal, not beckoning, just a soft circular movement in the air, as if stirring memory. 2 days later, a nurse hears him whisper something in his sleep. They lean close, but only catch the final word. Enough. That night he stops eating. 3 days after, he closes his eyes mid-morning and does not open them again. No ceremony, no declaration, no last confession, just stillness. The report reads, natural causes, cardiac failure, no signs of distress. But those who knew better, who studied him, feared him, tried to explain him, they believe it was a choice, that after all those years of silence, absence, and erasure, he finally completed his last poem. Not on paper, but through posture, intention, finality. He wrote it in stillness. They bury him without headlines, a modest plot, no public memorial, a name carved, but not celebrated. Still, for months afterward, strange things are reported. 3 knocks on a pipe in a Palermo prison wing, timed to dinner. A slip of paper tucked into a philosophy student's borrowed textbook. Echoes are not accidents. They are designs too patient to rush, a whisper in a courtroom. He was not the silence. He was what you feared would fill it, and maybe that's his final legacy. Not terror, not empire, not even memory, just a space left behind, still warm, still echoing, still unnamed. So now, as the light softens and the noise of the world slips behind us, take a slow breath. Let it settle in your chest like fog curling over early morning hills. You've walked through shadows tonight, through old alleys and older rituals. You've met a man who wore silence like armor and used stillness like a scalpel. A man who whispered without sound and lingered long after movements stopped. But that part's behind you now. Let it go. No need to carry the weight of his legend into your sleep. Let your shoulders ease. Feel the blankets shift just a little. Notice the air in the room. The hum of the fan, maybe, or the creak of the ceiling settling. Let those sounds cradle you. Let your thoughts unfurl like pages left open in a quiet room, because this is your time now. No codes, no names, no need to chase meaning, just you, breathing, resting, and drifting gently. If the shadows still linger a little, it's okay. They can't follow you here. Not where dreams soften the sharp edges. Not where even echoes choose to sleep. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let go of the names, the noise, the weight. Let go, and sleep well.